The Machine Underground, CERN and the God Particle Conspiracy. Before we dive into tonight's story, if you're enjoying the content here on Sleep Theories, consider dropping some hype points on this video. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into the unknown, and if you feel like it, drop a comment telling us what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing the global community we've built here, watching people tune in from every corner of the planet at every hour of the day and night. No pressure though, only if you want to share. Tonight's journey takes us beneath the peaceful farmland of the Swiss-French border, into the depths of the world's most ambitious scientific experiment. A huge thank you to Javiera Miss Chouet, Ahmad, Louis-22, and Chris for suggesting we explore this topic. You asked for it, and here we are. Picture this: 17 miles of circular tunnel, buried 100 metres underground, constructed at a cost approaching $9 billion, built for one purpose: to recreate the first moments after the Big Bang. Scientists call it the Large Hadron Collider. But what if the people studying the birth of the universe are simultaneously tearing holes in the fabric of reality itself? The fields above Geneva look unremarkable. Cows graze, farmers tend their land, families picnic on hillsides that roll gently toward the Alps. But beneath this pastoral scene lies something extraordinary: the world's largest scientific instrument. The Large Hadron Collider sits in a ring-shaped tunnel that crosses international borders, threading through Switzerland and France without most residents even knowing it's there. The facility is operated by CERN, the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, founded back in 1954 when the ashes of World War II were still fresh, and scientists dreamed of uniting Europe through shared discovery rather than dividing it through conflict. The machine's purpose sounds simple enough: accelerate protons to near-light speed and smash them together to study the fundamental building blocks of reality. But here's where things get interesting. Since the Collider's first full-power run back in 2008, a strange pattern emerged: global glitches, unexplained phenomena in the sky, the sudden rise of the Mandela effect, where millions of people remember history differently than it actually occurred, mass digital outages that seem to cascade across continents without clear cause, and every single time when you trace the dates backward, you find the same thing. The Large Hadron Collider was running at high power. Coincidence? Maybe. But the pattern is undeniable enough that it spawned one of the most persistent conspiracy theories of the 21st century. The theory that CERN isn't just studying the universe, they're changing it. What most people don't know is that beneath Geneva, CERN stores antimatter, the mirror opposite of normal matter. When matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate completely, converting all their mass directly into energy according to Einstein's famous equation. A single gram of antimatter reacting with a gram of matter would release an explosion equivalent to a nuclear bomb. The amount stored at CERN is minuscule, measured in nanograms, but it exists. Contained in magnetic bottles deep underground, suspended in vacuum, held mere atoms away from the container walls. One mistake, one power failure, one miscalculation. That's all it would take. Akid 1. The promise of science. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. Construction of the Large Hadron Collider began in 1998, built into an existing tunnel that once housed an earlier particle accelerator. The project took a decade and required unprecedented international cooperation. Thousands of scientists, engineers and technicians from dozens of countries worked together to create something that pushed the absolute limits of human engineering. The tunnel itself runs in a circle 27 kilometres in circumference, buried between 50 and 175 metres below the surface. Why underground? Because a project this massive would be impossible to build above ground, and the stable bedrock provides crucial stability for experiments that require precision down to fractions of a nanometer. But there's another reason. One CERN doesn't advertise. The depth provides natural shielding from cosmic rays and the electromagnetic interference. It also provides secrecy. Whatever happens in that tunnel happens hidden from public view, monitored only by the scientists who operate it and the governments who fund it. On September 10th, 2008, the moment finally arrived. The first beam of protons successfully circulated through the entire ring. Scientists at CERN headquarters erupted in applause. It was a triumph of human ingenuity, the culmination of decades of theoretical physics made real. But 9 days later, disaster struck. On September 19th, a faulty electrical connection between two superconducting magnets caused a catastrophic helium leak. Liquid helium, used to cool the magnets to near absolute zero, vaporized explosively. The resulting pressure wave damaged 53 magnets, each weighing several tons. The entire system had to be shut down. The official explanation was equipment failure, a design flaw in the electrical connections that nobody caught during testing. But conspiracy theorists noted something strange. The failure happened just days after the first successful circulation, during the initial attempts to ramp up to collision energy, as if something in the system didn't want to be activated, as if the universe itself was pushing back. Repairs took over a year. It wasn't until March 30th, 2010 that collision experiments finally began. The proton beams, travelling in opposite directions, around the ring, were guided into head-on collisions at energies of 7 trillion electron volts, 7 TeV in the shorthand of particle physics. And then they started finding things. The primary target was something called the Higgs boson, a theoretical particle predicted back in 1964 by physicist Peter Higgs and several colleagues. According to the standard model of particle physics, the Higgs boson is responsible for giving all other particles their mass. Without it, electrons, quarks, and every other fundamental particle would be massless, unable to form atoms, and the universe as we know it couldn't exist. It was nicknamed the God particle, a term physicists actually hate because it oversimplifies the science and sounds grandiose. But the name stuck in popular culture because it captured something essential. This was the particle that explained how creation itself works, the particle that holds reality together. Finding it required sifting through trillions upon trillions of particle collisions, looking for a specific signature that would only appear for a fraction of a second before the Higgs boson decayed into other particles. Two massive detector systems, ATLAS and CMS, worked independently to avoid confirmation bias. Both teams analysed their data separately, not sharing results until they were certain. On July 4th, 2012, CERN held a press conference. Director General Rolf Hoyer stood before a room packed with scientists and journalists. Fabiola Gianotti, who led one of the detector teams and would later become CERN Director General herself, presented the findings. "We observe in our data clear signs of a new particle," she announced, "at the level of 5 sigma. In statistical terms, 5 sigma means there's less than 1 in 3.5 million chance the signal is random noise. It was conclusive. They'd found it. The Higgs boson was real. Peter Higgs, then 83 years old, sat in the audience with tears streaming down his face. The particle that bore his name, predicted nearly 50 years earlier, had finally been discovered. The following year, he and François Englert shared the Nobel Prize in Physics. It should have been pure celebration, the crowning achievement of modern physics, and for scientists it was. But outside the academic world, something else was brewing. Online forums exploded with a different kind of reaction. Hundreds of threads appeared, all asking the same question. Did CERN just break the universe? Because something strange happened in the weeks following the announcement. People started noticing things, small things at first, memories that didn't match reality, logos that looked wrong, movie quotes that had changed, geography that seemed off. The Mandela effect was about to explode into public consciousness, and it was going to change everything. AC2, the strange signs and the shifting reality. The conspiracy theories started almost immediately, but they didn't solidify into a coherent narrative until strange incidents began accumulating. August 2016. A video goes viral showing several people wearing dark robes gathered at night in front of a statue on CERN's campus. The statue depicts Shiva Nataraja, the Hindu god of cosmic creation and destruction, a gift from the Indian government installed back in 2004. In the video, the robed figures seem to be conducting some kind of ritual. Then, in full view of the camera, one figure appears to stab another. The internet lost its mind. CERN responded quickly, confirming the video was real but dismissing it as a prank by visiting scientists meant to play into the conspiracy theories. They said they'd identified the people involved and handled it internally, but they refused to release any additional footage from their security cameras, citing privacy concerns. To conspiracists, this was confirmation. Why hide the full footage if it was just a harmless prank? What were they trying to conceal? And why would scientists, supposedly rational people dedicated to empirical truth, stage a mock human sacrifice in front of a statue representing cosmic destruction? Unless it wasn't entirely a mock ritual, unless there was something more happening that night. That same year, another pattern emerged. During several high-energy test runs, brief technical outages at the facility coincided with regional power fluctuations across parts of France and Switzerland. Nothing catastrophic, just momentary brownouts and voltage irregularities. CERN's official explanation was that the collider draws enormous amounts of power during operation, about the same as a medium-sized city, and this can stress the local grid. Fair enough. But then something happened that even skeptics found hard to dismiss as pure coincidence. In July 2016, LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory in the United States, detected gravitational waves from a cosmic event billions of light years away. This was groundbreaking science, the kind of discovery that makes headlines worldwide. But what most people don't know is that the detection occurred within hours of CERN conducting specialized proton-led collision tests. Was there a connection? Mainstream physicists said absolutely not. The gravitational waves detected by LIGO came from distant black holes merging, events that happened long before Earth even existed. The timing was pure coincidence. But here's where it gets interesting. Some theoretical physicists, operating on the fringes of accepted science, have proposed that high-energy particle collisions might create ripples in space-time, microscopic gravitational waves that could theoretically resonate with larger cosmic events. The mathematics is speculative, far from proven, but it's not completely impossible. What if CERN's experiments didn't cause the gravitational wave detection, but rather amplified it? What if there's some kind of quantum entanglement between human experiments and cosmic phenomena? What if, by recreating the conditions of the Big Bang, we're somehow connecting ourselves to other moments in space-time when those conditions existed? It sounds like science fiction. But so did gravitational waves themselves until we detected them. The Mandela Effect Timeline. Around 2012, shortly after the Higgs boson discovery, internet forums began filling with reports of the Mandela Effect. Named after a widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, when he actually lived until 2013, the phenomena describe situations where large groups of people remember historical events, brand names or cultural details differently than reality. But let's get specific about the timeline, because the correlation is disturbing. July 4th, 2012. CERN announces the Higgs boson discovery. July through September 2012. The first major wave of Mandela Effect reports appears on Reddit, 4chan, and conspiracy forums. People start documenting memories that don't match recorded history. The examples are oddly specific. The Berenstain Bears children's book series. Thousands of people, many of them former teachers and librarians who read these books professionally, insist the name was spelled Berenstain with an E. They remember it clearly. Some claim to have childhood books with the correct spelling. but every verifiable copy in existence shows Berenstain with an A. Publishers' records going back to the 1960s confirm it was always Berenstain. How do you explain thousands of people misremembering the same spelling in the same way? The Monopoly Man, rich Uncle Pennybags. Millions of people remember him wearing a monocle. If you ask someone to describe the Monopoly mascot, they'll almost certainly mention the monocle, but he never wore one. Not in any official game version, not in any advertisement, never. The image exists only in collective false memory, the Fruit of the Loom logo. Countless people remember the cornucopia, the Horn of Plenty behind the fruit. Some remember learning what a cornucopia was specifically because of this logo. But Fruit of the Loom has never used a cornucopia in their branding. The company has confirmed this repeatedly. These are just the famous examples. The lists go on for hundreds of entries. Geography that seems wrong. Brands spelled differently than remembered. Movie quotes that changed. Historical events that happened differently than people recall. Famous people who died at different times or in different ways than collective memory suggests. And here's the thing that keeps conspiracy theorists up at night. The intensity of Mandela effect reports corresponds almost perfectly with CERN's operational schedule. An independent researcher using the name Elias Carter did a statistical analysis that CERN refuses to address. Carter obtained the LHC's public run logs, which show when the collider operates and at what energy levels. He then scraped thousands of Mandela effect reports from various online platforms, extracting the dates when people first noticed discrepancies. His findings, major energy spikes at CERN, preceded waves of Mandela effect reports by an average of 30 to 60 days. The correlation was statistically significant, even accounting for publication bias and increased media attention. Carter's interpretation: reality shifts don't happen instantaneously. They propagate outward from the collision point, moving through space-time like ripples in a pond. People notice the changes gradually as the new timeline stabilizes and overwrites the old one. Those who notice fastest are those most sensitive to these shifts, or perhaps those whose consciousness exists slightly out of phase with consensus reality. Mainstream scientists dismissed Carter's work entirely, pointing out massive methodological flaws. The sample sizes were inconsistent, the date ranges were cherry-picked. He failed to control for social media algorithms that would naturally create clustering effects. And fundamentally, the entire premise violated established physics. But Carter had an answer for that last objection. He pointed to the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, the observer effect, the double-slit experiment showing that observation changes quantum outcomes. He argued that consciousness might play a role in collapsing quantum superpositions, and if CERN was creating conditions where multiple realities briefly overlapped, perhaps some observers retained memories from the superseded timeline. It's speculation built on speculation, but it's internally consistent speculation that explains a phenomenon mainstream science can't adequately address. Because the one thing everyone agrees on is that the Mandela effect is real as a psychological phenomenon. Millions of people do share these specific false memories. The disagreement is only about why. The D-wave connection. In 2013, the conspiracy took another turn when researchers discovered a possible connection to D-wave systems, a Canadian company building quantum computers. D-wave's computers operate on completely different principles than classical computers. Instead of bits that are either 1 or 0, they use qubits that can exist in superposition, simultaneously representing both states until measured. The computers are kept at temperatures near absolute zero, colder than deep space, and use quantum annealing to solve optimization problems by exploring all possible solutions simultaneously across quantum states. In other words, D-wave computers briefly create conditions where multiple computational realities exist at once. CERN announced in November 2013 that they'd be using D-wave quantum computers to help analyse the massive data sets generated by the LHC. The partnership made sense scientifically. The amount of data produced by particle collisions is staggering, and quantum computers, theoretically excel at pattern recognition and optimization tasks. But conspiracy researchers noticed something disturbing. The Mandela effect reports intensified after CERN began using quantum computing for data analysis, as if the act of quantum processing itself somehow amplified or stabilized the reality shifts created by the collisions. One theory goes like this. The LHC creates momentary conditions where multiple timelines branch from our own. The quantum computer, in analysing the data, becomes entangled with those alternate realities. Through some mechanism nobody understands, information from those other timelines leaks back into our reality, creating inconsistencies and false memories. It sounds absurd. Until you remember that quantum entanglement does allow instantaneous correlations between particles regardless of distance. Until you consider that the observer effect does show consciousness interacting with quantum systems. Until you look at the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which seriously proposes that every quantum measurement creates actual branching universes. If many worlds is true, CERN is creating new universes with every collision, trillions of them per second, and somewhere in that vast multi-dimensional structure, information might be leaking between branches, strange deaths and disappearances. Then there are the people who died or vanished. In January 2011, a senior particle physicist at CERN fell from the 7th floor of his apartment building in Geneva. The death was ruled a suicide. The man had recently expressed concerns in private emails about experimental safety, though CERN noted he'd also been dealing with depression. March 2015. Another CERN physicist died in a car accident under strange circumstances. His vehicle left the road on a clear day with no mechanical failure found. Toxicology was clean. He was an experienced driver familiar with the route. The accident report concluded he must have fallen asleep at the wheel, despite it being mid-morning after a full night's rest. November 2017. A CERN contractor specialising in superconducting magnets vanished while hiking in the Alps. Search teams found his backpack and some equipment but no body. The case remains open but cold. His family claims he was an expert mountaineer who wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks. August 2019. A data analyst who worked on LHC collision data died by apparent suicide. He left no note. Friends and family insist he showed no signs of depression or mental distress. Statistically, these incidents mean nothing. CERN employs thousands of people. Some will die by accident or suicide at rates consistent with the general population. Trying to find patterns in tragic but random deaths is textbook apophenia, seeing meaningful connections in unrelated events. But conspiracy theorists point out that all 4 individuals had high-level access to experimental data. All 4 deaths occurred during periods of active LHC operation, and all 4 cases had elements that family members or colleagues described as inconsistent with the individual's character or behaviour. There are also the disappearances that aren't official. People who claim to have worked at CERN who suddenly vanish from social media, delete their online presence, and become impossible to contact. Are they real former employees trying to escape conspiracy theorist harassment? Are they fictional personas created to spread disinformation? Or are they people who saw something they weren't supposed to see and were silenced? The problem with conspiracy theories is that once you're looking for patterns, you find them everywhere, and sometimes you find them because they are actually there. Act 3. Project Alice and the Antimatter. Question of the multiple experiments running at the Large Hadron Collider. One has attracted particular attention from conspiracy theorists. Alice. Alice stands for a Large Ion Collider experiment, and unlike the other detectors that primarily focus on proton collisions, Alice specialises in smashing together heavy ions, particularly lead nuclei. The goal is to recreate conditions that existed microseconds after the Big Bang, producing a state of matter called quark-gluon plasma, where protons and neutrons melt into their constituent parts. It's legitimate science, staffed by more than 1,500 scientists from over 40 countries. The research helps us understand the early universe, and the fundamental forces that shaped everything we see today. But there's something about that name, Alice. It immediately evokes Alice in Wonderland, falling down the rabbit hole into a reality that doesn't follow normal rules. And when conspiracy theorists learned what Alice actually does, creating conditions from the universe's first moments, the symbolism felt too perfect to ignore. Then came the leak. In 2018, an internal CERN document appeared on several conspiracy theory websites. The paper, dated several months earlier, made reference to unidentified spectral harmonics detected during heavy ion collision runs in the Alice detector. The language was technical, filled with physics jargon about frequency analysis and signal processing. To trained scientists, this was unremarkable. Spectral harmonics just refers to frequency patterns in detector readings, and unidentified simply meant they hadn't yet determined whether the signal came from the collision itself or background noise from the electronics. It was routine calibration work, the kind of thing that happens constantly in any large experimental facility. But to conspiracy researchers, those two words, unidentified harmonics, meant something very different. They interpreted it as evidence of dimensional interference, signals bleeding through from parallel universes or alternate realities that the collisions had momentarily connected to our own. A whistleblower using the pseudonym Thomas Kellner claimed in an anonymous post to have worked in the Alice collaboration. His post, which appeared on a dark web forum in March 2019, described detecting resonance patterns that shouldn't exist during a specific test run in late 2018. According to Kellner, the patterns showed structure, regularity, as if they were being generated by something purposeful rather than random quantum noise. He claimed the data was immediately classified above his access level and that team members were told to stop discussing it. When he pushed for answers, he was reassigned to different work. His post ended with, "They found something in the plasma, something that's looking back." The post was impossible to verify. Kellner never provided proof of employment or concrete data. His identity was never confirmed. CERN has thousands of researchers and contractors, and tracking down one anonymous post from an alleged insider is essentially impossible. But the post gained traction because it touched on something deeper than just technical anomalies. It suggested intentionality. Not that CERN accidentally discovered something strange, but that something strange discovered CERN. The antimatter mystery. Here's something most people don't think about. CERN produces antimatter, not as a goal of the LHC specifically, but as part of the research conducted at the facility. The antimatter factory at CERN creates antiprotons and antihydrogen atoms for experiments studying the fundamental symmetries of physics. They trap these particles in electromagnetic fields, suspending them in perfect vacuum, just atoms, away from the container walls. When matter touches antimatter, both are instantly converted into energy. Not nuclear energy, where a tiny fraction of mass becomes energy. Total conversion. 100% efficiency according to E=mc². A single gram of antimatter meeting a gram of matter would release approximately 43 kilotons of energy, roughly 3 times the Hiroshima bomb. CERN stores nanograms of antimatter. That's billionths of a gram. Barely enough to power a light bulb for a few minutes if it could be released safely. Not nearly enough to pose any catastrophic danger, or so they say. A leaked budget document from 2014, verified as authentic by multiple sources, though CERN won't confirm its contents publicly, showed funding allocated for expanded antimatter storage and handling capabilities. The amounts were significant, suggesting infrastructure well beyond what existing experiments required. What were they planning to do with larger quantities of antimatter? The official explanation, when pressed, was that future experiments might need more antiparticles for precision measurements. Perfectly reasonable. But theoretical physicists have long speculated about antimatter propulsion for spacecraft. The energy density is unmatched. A spaceship with an antimatter engine could theoretically reach a significant fraction of light speed, and if you wanted to power something truly enormous, something that drew more energy than the electrical grid could supply, antimatter would be one solution. What if the expansions and upgrades to the LHC aren't just about gathering more data? What if they're building towards something that requires power levels beyond anything currently available? Some conspiracy theories suggest CERN is constructing a portal device, a literal doorway to other dimensions or other times. Such a device would require staggering amounts of energy, possibly only achievable through antimatter. Others suggest they're trying to create a stable micro-black hole, something that could be contained and studied but would need enormous energy just to form and possibly antimatter to feed it. These theories are wildly speculative, bordering on science fiction, but they emerge from a simple observation. CERN keeps expanding its capabilities and increasing its energy usage for reasons that aren't always publicly explained in detail. They're preparing for something beyond current experiments. The question is, what? Act 4. Run 3 and the New Fears. After the Higgs boson discovery, CERN began planning major upgrades to the Large Hadron Collider. The goal was to increase the collision energy and, more importantly, the luminosity, essentially how many collisions occur per second. More collisions mean more data, and more data means better chances of discovering new physics beyond the standard model. In late 2018, the collider shut down for extensive upgrades. For 3 years, teams worked to enhance the magnets, improve the beam injection systems, and upgrade the detectors. It was scheduled to restart in 2022 with significantly increased capabilities. As the restart date approached, conspiracy communities went into overdrive. On April 22, 2022, the Large Hadron Collider roared back to life. Proton beams once again circulated through the 17-mile ring, building up energy as the magnets ramped to full power. The internet noticed immediately. Social media feeds filled with posts documenting strange occurrences around the world coinciding with the restart. April 23, 2022. Multiple reports of unusual cloud formations across Europe. Perfectly circular gaps in cloud cover, as if something had punched through from below. Meteorologists attributed this to natural atmospheric phenomena, but the timing and geographic distribution centered suspiciously on Geneva. April 25th. A widespread internet outage affected major platforms globally. The cause was traced to a configuration error at a cloud services provider, nothing to do with CERN. But the timing was noted. April 27th. Amateur astronomers recorded unusual electromagnetic readings in the upper atmosphere above Switzerland. The signals were brief, lasting only seconds, but were strong enough to be picked up by equipment designed for studying aurora phenomena. Then, on July 5th, 2022, Run 3 officially began. The collision energy reached 13.6 TeV, the highest ever achieved. CERN celebrated this milestone, announcing it would lead to unprecedented sensitivity for detecting rare particle interactions. Social media exploded. Within hours of the announcement, Twitter, Reddit and TikTok filled with posts claiming CERN had opened the portal again. People compiled lists of strange occurrences that happened around the same time. Unusual cloud formations, unexplained booms heard across different continents, reports of electronic devices malfunctioning, even claims that the texture of reality felt different somehow. A hashtag trended. CERN again. But it wasn't just online hysteria. Credible, documented incidents occurred that skeptics found harder to dismiss. July 6, 2022. The European Mediterranean Seismological Centre recorded unusual seismic activity in the Geneva region. Not earthquakes, but rhythmic vibrations at regular intervals. The pattern matched the collision schedule at CERN. Geologists explained that large machinery can create detectable vibrations, but the signals were stronger than expected from an underground facility. July 8th. Multiple commercial airline pilots reported temporary instrument malfunctions while flying over or near Switzerland. Compass deviations, altitude indicator glitches, GPS errors. Each incident lasted only minutes, and all instruments returned to normal function. Aviation authorities investigated and found no systemic issues with the aircraft. July 10th, a power substation in France, about 50 kilometres from CERN, experienced an unexplained surge that tripped safety systems and caused temporary outages in surrounding areas. The utility company couldn't identify the source of the surge. Each incident individually was explainable. Collectively, they formed a pattern that was harder to ignore. CERN spokesperson, Paula Alves, responded to the surge of concern in multiple interviews. Her message was consistent and patient. No, we're not opening portals, we're recreating particle interactions that happen naturally in the atmosphere every second. The only difference is we're doing it in a controlled environment where we can study what happens. She emphasised the safety studies that had been conducted before every upgrade, the peer review process involving thousands of independent scientists, and the fundamental impossibility of the collider creating anything dangerous. The energies involved, while huge by human standards, were tiny compared to cosmic ray collisions that have been bombarding Earth for billions of years without causing any problems. To most people this was reassuring, but to the conspiracy-minded, official denials just added fuel to the fire. The Reality Monitoring Project. Independent researchers began monitoring electromagnetic data around the Geneva area using commercially available magnetometer equipment to detect fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field. Several groups claimed to have recorded anomalies that coincided with LHC operational schedules, though the data was never formally published or verified by independent institutions. One particularly detailed effort came from a group calling themselves the Reality Monitoring Project. They set up monitoring stations at various distances from CERN, ranging from 5 kilometres to over 200 kilometres away, and collected readings continuously over several months during Run-3 operations. Their equipment measured magnetic field strength, electromagnetic radiation across multiple frequencies, and even subtle air pressure variations. All data was time-stamped and logged automatically to avoid human bias. Their findings, posted freely online with all raw data available for anyone to analyse, showed what they described as irregular magnetic pulses that appear to correlate with high-energy collision windows. The pulses were small, barely above background noise, but they were present and they were rhythmic. More disturbing, the pulses seemed to propagate outward from Geneva. Stations closer to CERN detected them first, with outer stations picking up similar patterns minutes to hours later, as if the disturbance was spreading through the magnetic field at a measurable speed. The Reality Monitoring Project published their methodology and invited skeptical scientists to review their work. Several did, pointing out multiple problems. The equipment used wasn't properly calibrated against certified standards. There were no control readings from locations hundreds of kilometres away to establish whether similar patterns appeared globally. The statistical analysis conflated correlation with causation and cherry-picked time windows to make patterns appear stronger than they were. But here's what the skeptics couldn't explain. Independent groups in different countries, using different equipment and different analysis methods, were reporting similar findings. The readings didn't match exactly, but they all showed anomalies correlating with CERN's operational schedule. Either there was a coordinated hoax involving dozens of independent researchers who'd never met, or something was creating detectable electromagnetic effects beyond what CERN officially acknowledged. The third possibility, confirmation bias and methodological errors, were so widespread that multiple groups independently arrived at false conclusions. This is actually the most likely explanation scientifically, but it's also the least satisfying. Because if citizen scientists using consumer-grade equipment can detect anomalies, why can't CERN, with its vastly superior instruments and expertise? Either the anomalies are real, and CERN knows about them but isn't disclosing the information, or the anomalies are artifacts of poor methodology, and CERN is simply ignoring noise. Neither answer is comforting. Aceat 5. The symbolism, the rituals, and the silence. If you visit CERN's main campus in Geneva, one of the first things you'll notice is the statue of Shiva. The statue depicts Shiva Nataraja, the lord of the cosmic dance. It stands about 2 meters tall, bronze and graceful, showing the god frozen mid-dance inside a ring of flames. One foot crushes a demon representing ignorance, the other lifts in eternal motion. Multiple arms spread outward, one hand holding a drum representing creation, another holding fire representing destruction. The statue was a gift from the government of India in 2004, installed to honour the long-standing collaboration between Indian scientists and CERN. The symbolism is actually quite appropriate. Shiva's cosmic dance represents the endless cycle of creation and destruction that governs the universe. CERN's work, smashing particles together and watching them emerge and decay, mirrors this dance at the quantum level. But to conspiracy theorists, the symbolism means something darker. Shiva destroys worlds. Shiva dances reality into and out of existence. Why would the world's most powerful particle physics laboratory choose this particular deity to stand watch over their work unless they knew, on some level, that they were playing with destructive cosmic forces? The statue's position is also notable. It stands outside Building 40, home to CERN's administrative offices, visible to everyone entering the main campus. It's a statement of purpose, a declaration of intent. We are dancing at the edge of creation and destruction, the logo and the numbers. Then there's the logo. CERN's official logo consists of 2 interlocking circles with a series of smaller circular elements. To most people it's abstract and modern, suggesting particles and orbits, but look at it a certain way, and you can see 3 number 6s arranged in a circular pattern. 6, 6, 6. The number of the beast from the Book of Revelation. Is it intentional? CERN says no, pointing out that the design was created to represent particle accelerators and nothing more. The 6s are just an artifact of the overlapping circles, a coincidence of geometry. But graphic designers note that logos go through extensive review and iteration. Someone at some point must have noticed the 6s, someone must have pointed it out, and yet the design remained unchanged. For conspiracy theorists with religious inclinations, this is proof of intentional satanic symbolism. They point to other numbers associated with CERN as well. The collider itself is 17 miles in circumference. In some numerological systems, 17 reduces to 8, which itself represents infinity and eternal cycles. The tunnel sits between 50 and 175 metres below ground. That's an average depth of 112.5 metres. Add those digits. 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 5 equals 9. Multiply by the number of 6s in the logo. 3 times 9 equals 27, the exact number of kilometres in the tunnel. This is numerology, not mathematics. You can make any set of numbers mean anything if you manipulate them enough. But the patterns keep appearing, and to believers, that means something. The opening ceremony. In June 2016, the Gotthard Base Tunnel opened in Switzerland, the world's longest and deepest traffic tunnel, running parallel to and even deeper than the LHC in some sections. The opening ceremony was one of the strangest public events in recent memory. The ceremony featured bizarre theatrical performances, people in white bodysuits writhing on the ground, a baby-faced sun with an enormous tongue, workers bowing down to a goat-headed figure, dancers simulating sexual acts, imagery of death and resurrection. It was surreal, disturbing, and broadcast live to millions of viewers. CERN scientists were invited guests of honour, prominently featured in attendance. The official explanation was that the ceremony represented Swiss folklore and the hard work of tunnel construction through allegory and artistic expression. The goat-headed figure was a reference to local legends, not Baphomet. The strange imagery was simply European performance art, but to conspiracy theorists, it looked like an occult ritual performed in plain sight. The symbolism echoed mystery school traditions, Masonic imagery, and satanic aesthetics. and CERN's presence connected the event to the larger narrative of scientific research as modern dark magic. A month later, the mock sacrifice video was filmed at CERN, the one supposedly explained away as a prank. The timing felt less like coincidence and more like continuation of something begun at the tunnel opening. Public relations or mocking, CERN's public outreach doesn't help quiet these concerns, at least not in the way they intend. In an effort to make their work accessible and exciting, they've produced videos and installations that play with concepts from science fiction and quantum theory. Their visitor centre features artistic representations of parallel universes, wormholes and higher dimensions. In one promotional video from several years ago, CERN scientists talk about opening doorways to new dimensions and exploring realms beyond our everyday experience. They're speaking metaphorically, using vivid language to describe abstract mathematics. But taken literally, those phrases sound exactly like what conspiracy theorists have been warning about. Another video featured a rap performance by CERN scientists, with lyrics about reaching beyond the veil and breaking through to other sides. It was meant to be fun and approachable. But the language, whether intentional or not, echoes occult terminology about piercing the veil between worlds and accessing forbidden knowledge. Are they mocking the conspiracy theories, embracing them ironically? Or do these linguistic choices reveal something about how CERN scientists actually think about their work, even if only subconsciously? When you spend your career trying to shatter the fundamental structure of matter, when you deliberately create conditions that haven't existed since the first moments after creation, maybe your language naturally drifts toward the apocalyptic and the mystical. Because that's genuinely what you're doing, even if the reality is prosaic particles in a tunnel rather than dramatic portals to other dimensions, the rumours and the silences. There are also the rumours, the whispered stories that circulate online, impossible to verify but too specific to feel completely fabricated. In 2015, an anonymous email supposedly leaked from someone claiming to work in CERN's data analysis division. The email described the detection of an unusual particle signature at an energy level of 750 GeV during test collisions. The particle appeared and vanished in a pattern that didn't match any known physics. The email claimed that upper management ordered the data suppressed, and the detection never officially reported. Months later, CERN did announce they'd observed an interesting signal around 750 GeV. But after collecting more data, they determined it was a statistical fluctuation, not a real particle. This kind of false positive is common in particle physics, exactly what you'd expect from the noisy environment of trillion collision experiments. To conspiracists, though, the sequence looks suspicious. Anonymous leak mentions 750. CERN later acknowledges 750. Then they walk it back, saying it was nothing. Pattern of discover, suppress, deny. Another rumour surfaced in 2019 about a major data centre blackout that allegedly occurred during Run 3 preparation tests. According to the story, a power surge fried multiple server racks, destroying months of experimental results. CERN supposedly implemented information lockdown, requiring staff to sign additional non-disclosure agreements and restricting access to the affected systems. No evidence for this has ever emerged. No news reports, no insider confirmations, nothing. It might be completely invented, but it fits the pattern conspiracy theories thrive on. Data appears, something goes wrong, explanations arrive late or not at all, and the official story feels incomplete. The frustrating thing, from CERN's perspective, is that they are remarkably transparent. They publish thousands of scientific papers every year. Their data is available to researchers worldwide. Their safety reports are public. They give tours to school children and host public lectures. But transparency doesn't eliminate suspicion when people have already decided the official story can't be trusted. Every explanation becomes a cover story. Every denial confirms guilt. Every delay or complication becomes evidence of conspiracy. It's a psychological trap with no easy escape. And meanwhile, deep underground, the machine keeps running. The collisions continue. The data accumulates. Whatever is really happening beneath those Swiss fields, it's happening whether we trust CERN or not. AC6, the science, the speculation, and the unanswered questions. Let's take a step back and look at what scientists actually say about the concerns raised by conspiracy theories. Fabiola Gianotti, CERN's Director General, has addressed these fears multiple times in interviews and public appearances. Her message is always calm, clear, and grounded in observable evidence. She emphasises that the physics governing the LHC's operations is well understood, and that the collider operates safely within known boundaries. We study the fundamental laws of nature, she explains in one interview. These are the same laws that have governed the universe for billions of years. We're not changing them or breaking them. We're simply observing them in controlled conditions. Brian Cox, the physicist and science communicator, has been even more direct in dismissing portal theories. If the LHC could destroy the world, he said repeatedly, cosmic rays would have done it long ago. Every second, particles far more energetic than anything we can produce hit our atmosphere. If that was dangerous, we wouldn't be here to worry about it. It's a solid logical argument based on what's called the cosmic ray argument for safety. The universe is constantly running experiments more extreme than anything humans can create. Earth has been bombarded by high-energy particles for over 4 billion years. If such collisions could create dangerous black holes, destroy matter in catastrophic ways, or tear holes in space-time, it would have happened naturally countless times already. The fact that we exist proves it's safe, but not everyone accepts this reasoning completely. The edge cases. Some independent theoretical physicists, while not endorsing the conspiracy theories, have raised questions about edge cases and unknowns. They point out that cosmic ray collisions, while more energetic, happen differently than collider experiments. In cosmic ray impacts, one particle moving at near-light speed hits a stationary target. In the LHC, two particles moving at near-light speed hit each other head-on. Does this difference matter? Probably not. The centre of mass energy is what counts, and cosmic rays still win that comparison. But could there be some exotic interaction that only manifests in carefully controlled collision geometries? The probability is extraordinarily low, but it's not mathematically zero. There's also the question of cumulative effects. Cosmic ray collisions happen randomly, scattered across the atmosphere. The LHC concentrates trillions of collisions in the same tiny region of space. Could there be threshold effects or resonance phenomena that only appear with sustained high-density interactions? Again, theoretical physicists say almost certainly not. But almost certainly isn't quite the same as certainly. Quantum consciousness. Then there's the question of quantum consciousness, a controversial idea even among physicists who take quantum mechanics seriously. Some interpretations of quantum theory, particularly the observer effect, suggest that consciousness plays a role in collapsing quantum superpositions into definite states. If that's true, even slightly, then what happens when thousands of conscious observers are deliberately smashing particles together trillions of times? Are we just observing the quantum realm, or are we participating in shaping it? Mainstream physicists overwhelmingly reject this kind of thinking as pseudoscience. Consciousness, they argue, is an emergent property of complex neural networks, not a fundamental force that influences particle behaviour. The observer effect in quantum mechanics doesn't require consciousness, just interaction with measurement devices. But the philosophical questions linger. When we observe something at the absolute limits of reality, how sure can we be that the observation itself doesn't alter what we're seeing? This is where science starts to blur into something that looks like mysticism, not because the science is wrong, but because it's pushing into territory where human intuition breaks down completely. We evolved to understand medium-sized objects moving at moderate speeds in 3 dimensions. We did not evolve to intuitively grasp quantum superposition, space-time curvature, or 11-dimensional string theory. At a certain point, even the scientists have to operate on faith. Faith that the mathematics is correct. Faith that the instruments are measuring what we think they're measuring. Faith that the theories we've constructed actually describe reality, rather than just predicting experimental outcomes. That faith is based on extraordinary evidence and rigorous testing, but it's still, at some level, faith. The mini black hole. Question 1 of the earliest fears about the LHC was that it might create mini black holes that would grow and consume the Earth. This fear was prominent enough that CERN commissioned specific safety studies before the collider's first operations. The studies concluded that even if micro black holes formed, they would evaporate instantly through Hawking radiation, a quantum effect where black holes lose mass by emitting particles. The smaller the black hole, the faster it evaporates. A black hole with the mass of a proton would vanish in less time than it takes light to cross an atomic nucleus. This is solid physics based on Stephen Hawking's theoretical work from the 1970s. The mathematics is sound. The predictions match observations of larger black holes. But here's the thing. Hawking radiation has never been directly observed. It's never been tested experimentally because we can't create black holes in laboratories or get close enough to natural black holes to measure them precisely. The theory is almost certainly correct, but it's still theory. What if Hawking was wrong? What if there's some condition under which micro black holes don't evaporate, or evaporate slower than predicted? If a stable micro black hole formed and began accumulating matter, it would sink to the Earth's core through gravity. There, it would slowly consume the planet from the inside, growing larger as it absorbed more matter, until eventually nothing remained but a black hole the size of a marble with Earth's entire mass compressed into it. The timescale would be geological. It might take millions or billions of years, but it would be inevitable. CERN safety studies say this is impossible. Cosmic rays far more energetic than the LHC regularly create collisions in the atmosphere and in astronomical bodies throughout the universe. If stable dangerous black holes could form from such collisions, neutron stars and white dwarfs would be full of them. The fact that these objects exist and are stable proves the safety of similar collisions in the LHC. It's a compelling argument, but it rests on our understanding of physics being complete and correct at these extreme energy scales. And history shows that our understanding of physics is never complete. Newton's laws worked perfectly until someone tested them at high speeds and discovered relativity. Relativity worked perfectly until someone examined the quantum scale and discovered quantum mechanics. What if there's another layer we haven't discovered yet? What if there are corrections to our theories that only matter at the precise conditions the LHC creates? The probability is infinitesimally small, but it's not zero, and we're betting the entire planet on being right. Act 7. The human element and the search for truth. To understand how the CERN conspiracy has persisted and grown, let's follow someone who tried to bridge the gap between believers and skeptics. Laura Hayes is a journalist, fictional for our purposes, but representative of many real reporters who've investigated this story. She spent 18 months documenting the CERN conspiracy community, interviewing everyone from CERN employees to online theorists, convinced reality was being rewritten with each collision. Her journey started simply enough. She wanted to understand why intelligent people believed something that mainstream science dismissed so completely. Were they all gullible, mentally unstable, or was there something deeper, some legitimate concern being expressed through the metaphor of conspiracy? What she found surprised her. The CERN employees she interviewed were, almost universally, thoughtful and patient. They understood the public's fear. They got the particle physics as counterintuitive, and that the scale of the LHC is genuinely intimidating. Many had children of their own and took safety concerns seriously, not just as scientists, but as human beings who wanted to leave a livable world for the next generation. They invited her to visit the facility, showed her the control rooms and detector halls, explained the layers of redundancy built into every system. They answered her questions without condescension, even when those questions came directly from conspiracy forums and involved concepts they knew were impossible. One researcher, Elena Kovac, spent 3 hours walking Laura through the safety analysis process. She explained how they model every conceivable failure mode, how they test components beyond their design limits, how they incorporate lessons from decades of accelerator operations worldwide. "Do you ever worry?" Laura asked. "Even a little?" Elena paused before answering. "I worry about calibration errors in the data. I worry about missing something important because we weren't looking in the right energy range. I worry about funding being cut before we answer the questions we're trying to answer. But destroying the world? No. The physics doesn't allow it. Not in any scenario we can conceive of with our current understanding. But your current understanding could be wrong." "It could be," Elena admitted. "But if we're that fundamentally wrong about physics, the universe should have destroyed itself billions of years ago through natural processes. The fact that we're here, having this conversation, is evidence that reality is stable under these conditions." It was a good answer, but it didn't entirely address the fear. On the other side, Laura met the conspiracy theorists. They weren't the stereotypes she expected. Many were educated, articulate, and genuinely curious about science. They'd done their research, read CERN's papers, understood the basic physics. But they'd also seen patterns mainstream scientists dismissed. They'd experienced the Mandela effect personally, held vivid memories that contradicted documented reality. They'd noticed the timing of global events and technical anomalies that seemed too consistent to ignore. And they felt like they weren't being heard. Every time they raised concerns, scientists responded with variations of "you don't understand" or "trust us." Even when the scientists meant this kindly, it felt patronising. It felt like being told to sit down and stop asking questions. Michael Torres, a former software engineer who'd become deeply involved in conspiracy research, explained his journey to Laura over coffee in Geneva, within sight of CERN's campus. "I used to think conspiracy theorists were idiots," he said. "Then I experienced a Mandela effect that I couldn't explain away. The Fruit of the Loom logo. I learned what a cornucopia was specifically from that logo when I was 6 years old. My mother had to explain what the horn thing behind the fruit was. That's a formative memory, clear as day. But the logo never had a cornucopia. I know, I've checked every version. It's not there. It never was there. But I remember it. And not vaguely. Crystal clear, specific memory tied to a learning moment with my mother." "So you think CERN changed reality?" "I think something changed. Maybe it's CERN, maybe it's something else. But when thousands of people share the exact same false memory, that's not random. That's a pattern that needs explanation," Laura pushed back. "Psychologists explain it through confabulation, suggestion, and the unreliability of human memory." "Sure, that explains some of it. But all of it? With that level of specificity? With perfect consistency across thousands of independent accounts?" Michael shook his head. "I spent 20 years writing code, debugging systems, looking for patterns in data. This isn't noise. This is signal." The visit Laura's final trip to CERN happened during a scheduled test run. She stood in the visitor centre with a small group of tourists and journalists watching displays that showed the proton beams ramping up to full energy deep underground. The screens displayed real-time data, beam intensity, collision rate, detector readings. Numbers climbed. Graphs spiked. Somewhere below their feet, particles were being accelerated to 99.99999%, the speed of light, circling the ring 11,000 times per second before smashing together in bursts of pure energy. The guide explained what they were watching. Each collision releases about the energy of a mosquito flying, but concentrated in a space trillions of times smaller than the mosquito. That concentration is what lets us probe the fundamental structure of matter. And then something happened. Nothing dramatic, just a brief flicker. The lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. A faint vibration rippled through the floor, barely perceptible unless you were paying attention. The CERN guide explained immediately. That's the main magnets coming online to full power. They draw tremendous current. You'll notice the lights sometimes fluctuate during high-energy operations. Everyone nodded. Perfectly normal. Exactly what you'd expect. But Laura felt something she couldn't quite name. Standing there, knowing that beneath her feet reality was being torn apart and reconstructed trillions of times per second, she understood both sides completely. The science said it was safe. The science was almost certainly right, but almost isn't quite the same as absolutely. In her notes later, she wrote, "Maybe it's just physics, or maybe every time they press that button, the universe has to choose which version of itself keeps going, and maybe we're all sitting here trusting that it keeps choosing us." She never published her investigation, not because she found evidence of conspiracy, but because she realised the truth was more nuanced than either side wanted to admit. CERN wasn't hiding dark secrets or opening portals, but they were pushing the boundaries of known physics into realms where certainty becomes impossible. They were operating in the space between what we know and what we can never fully know, trusting that our mathematical models correctly describe reality at scales we can't directly perceive, that trust is probably justified, but it's still trust. And for people who've experienced phenomena like the Mandela effect, who felt reality shift in ways they can't explain, trust in establishment science isn't enough. They need answers that science can't provide yet. Maybe won't ever provide. Ending. Fact versus faith, truth versus mystery. The story of CERN and the Large Hadron Collider doesn't have a tidy ending because the story is still being written. As of right now, CERN is preparing for its next major phase, the High Luminosity Large Hadron Collider, scheduled to begin operations around 2030. This upgrade will increase the collision rate by a factor of 10, producing vastly more data and creating opportunities to discover physics beyond anything we currently understand. The specifications are staggering. The HLLHC will produce between 5 and 7 times more integrated luminosity over its operational lifetime. That's hundreds of millions of additional Higgs bosons, billions of top quarks, countless opportunities to find cracks in the standard model. The conspiracy communities are already preparing. Social media chatter claims this next phase will be the one that finally goes too far, that reality won't survive the increased intensity, that whatever thin barrier separates us from other dimensions or timelines will finally rupture completely. Some groups have started predicting specific dates when they believe the dimensional collapse will occur. These predictions follow the pattern of apocalyptic prophecies throughout history, specific, confident, and inevitably wrong when the date passes without incident. But each failed prediction doesn't dampen the fear. It just pushes the timeline forward. Next year, next upgrade, next energy level. Eventually they'll be right that something happens. Not because CERN actually breaks reality, but because the law of large numbers guarantees that something notable will eventually coincide with a major operation. A natural disaster, a technical failure, a geopolitical event. And when it does, conspiracy theorists will point to it as vindication. CERN responds with the same calm assurance they always have. More safety studies, more transparency, more public outreach. They're confident because the physics says they should be confident. But confidence and certainty aren't quite the same thing. Meanwhile, children tour the facility on school trips, excited by the discovery and wonder of fundamental science. Young students dream of becoming physicists, of contributing to humanity's understanding of the cosmos. CERN represents the best of what we can achieve when we work together across borders towards shared knowledge. And in quiet corners of the internet, people continue to document Mandela effects, strange phenomena, unexplained glitches in reality. They compare notes, look for patterns, and watch CERN's operational calendar with suspicion and fear. Both groups, in their own way, are asking the same question. What are we really doing down there? For scientists, the answer is clear. We're unlocking the secrets of matter and energy, understanding how the universe works at its most fundamental level. We're doing what humans have always done, pushing boundaries, asking questions, refusing to accept ignorance when knowledge is possible. For others, the answer is darker. We're rewriting the code of existence itself, tampering with forces that govern creation and destruction, perhaps changing reality in ways we don't even recognise because our memories change along with it. Between the magnets and the myths stands a truth that both sides might accept. We built a machine powerful enough to test creation itself. The Large Hadron Collider operates at energies that haven't existed since the first microseconds after the Big Bang. It recreates conditions that gave birth to all matter, all energy, all structure in the universe. It lets us peer into the quantum realm where reality becomes probability, and the act of observation changes what we're observing. Whether we fully understand what it's showing us remains an open question. The data doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the whole truth. Either the data is real, the discoveries are real, the Higgs boson exists, the mathematics works, the predictions prove accurate time and again, but the universe is vast and strange and doesn't care about human understanding. We've explored only a tiny fraction of possible physics. We don't know what dark matter is, the substance that makes up 85% of all matter in the universe. We don't know what dark energy is, the force accelerating the universe's expansion. We don't know why the universe exists at all rather than nothing. We don't know if parallel universes are real, or if consciousness plays any role in quantum mechanics, or what happens to information that falls into a black hole. Every answer raises new questions. Every discovery reveals new mysteries. CERN operates in that space between knowledge and ignorance, pushing the boundary forward one collision at a time. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do as a species, explore and question, and risk being wrong in pursuit of being less wrong tomorrow. Or maybe, just maybe, there are boundaries we shouldn't cross, forces we shouldn't touch, doors we shouldn't open even if we can. Standing on the surface above those 17 miles of circular tunnel, watching cows graze and families picnic, it's easy to forget what's happening below. The hum of the universe being taken apart and put back together again, over and over, trillions of times per second. Most days, it's just science. Remarkable, profound, world-changing science. But some days, late at night when the collider runs at full power and strange reports filter through social media, and you remember that we built a statue to a god of cosmic destruction at the entrance to a machine that recreates creation itself, you might find yourself wondering, are we discovering the universe, or are we changing it? The scientists say we're only discovering. The conspiracy theorists say we're changing everything. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, in that uncomfortable space where certainty gives way to possibility. The mystery endures. All the CERN data referenced in this investigation is drawn from public reports published between 2008 and 2024. Independent review committees have examined the safety of the Large Hadron Collider extensively. No credible evidence supports claims of dimensional alteration, timeline manipulation, or reality modification. The Mandela effect is a real psychological phenomenon documented by cognitive researchers, but mainstream science attributes it to the well-understood unreliability of human memory, rather than timeline shifts. The strange incidents and anomalies reported around CERN operations have mundane explanations. Power fluctuations are normal for high-energy facilities. Electromagnetic readings can be affected by countless sources. Pattern recognition in human brains naturally finds correlations even in random data. But the mystery endures because at the end of the day we're still just barely evolved primates playing with forces that shape the cosmos. We're clever enough to build the machine, smart enough to make predictions about what will happen, but maybe not quite wise enough to know whether we should. The collider runs tonight, as it does most nights. Protons circle, magnets hum, particles collide. data accumulates. Somewhere, someone is experiencing a memory that doesn't match documented history. They're confused, disturbed, wondering if they're going crazy or if reality itself is unstable. Somewhere else, someone is measuring an anomaly they can't quite explain. A signal that shouldn't be there. A pattern in the noise that looks almost deliberate. And somewhere in Geneva, a scientist is looking at unexpected results from the latest run and wondering what it means. Are they seeing something new about the universe? An error in their analysis? Or the first hint of something they haven't even imagined yet? The universe keeps its secrets close. We keep asking questions. And beneath the peaceful fields of the Swiss-French border, the largest machine ever built continues its cosmic dance, pulling creation apart to understand how it was made, whether reality survives each collision or quietly shifts into a new configuration, choosing one timeline over another, leaving only those memories that fit the new history is something we might never know. Because if reality changes and our memories change with it, how would we ever detect the difference? We wouldn't remember the old timeline. We'd only know this one, the one where we've always existed, where history has always been exactly as it is now, unless some people remember, unless consciousness doesn't update perfectly when reality shifts, unless we're all leaving traces of ourselves in every timeline we pass through, phantom memories echoing across parallel worlds. The scientists say that's impossible, and they're probably right. Probably. But on nights when the collider runs at full power, and you can't shake the feeling that something is slightly wrong with the world, that reality has a faint seam you can almost perceive, if you look at it sideways, you might wonder, do you remember it differently? Are you sure you don't? They moved with efficient, brutal precision that spoke of years of practice and unlimited resources. Men in dark tactical gear emblazoned with HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, flooded her apartment like a coordinated invasion force. They carried electronic jammers that immediately killed her internet connection and cell phone signal, ensuring that no evidence of the raid could be transmitted to the outside world. Mara didn't resist. She couldn't. The revelation of her own name in the exercise documents had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of reality. She sat frozen in her chair as they systematically dismantled her entire investigation, bagging computers, hard drives, printed documents, and the original VHS tape that had started everything. Mara Ellison, the team leader announced, his voice carrying the flat, bureaucratic authority of someone who had recited these words many times before. You are being detained under the Espionage Act and the provisions of the Patriot Act for the unauthorized access of classified material and conspiracy to aid terrorist entities in their ongoing operations against the United States. The charges were absurd, but Mara understood that absurdity was the point. In the post-9/11 legal framework, the government's definition of terrorism had expanded to include almost any activity that challenged official narratives. Her research, her questions, her very curiosity had been redefined as acts of treason. As they led her out in handcuffs, past the terrified faces of neighbours who would remember her as the woman who had turned out to be a spy, Mara caught a glimpse of someone watching from across the street. It was Kellerman, the man from the cafe, observing her arrest with the detached professionalism of someone monitoring a completed operation. Their eyes met for a brief moment and he nodded slightly, not in greeting or sympathy, but in acknowledgement, a confirmation that everything had proceeded according to plan. The government's case against her was presented in a sealed FISA court, where neither the evidence nor the proceedings were accessible to public scrutiny. They had documentation of her accessing classified servers, recordings of her encrypted communications with foreign assets like at Radar Ghost, and her own research notes that they characterized as intelligence gathering for hostile entities. They presented her investigation not as the work of a concerned citizen or independent researcher, but as a sophisticated espionage operation designed to undermine public confidence in government institutions and aid terrorist recruitment. Every question she had asked was reframed as an attack on national security. Every fact she had uncovered was presented as intelligence that could be used against American interests. The judge, operating under national security guidelines that prioritise state secrets over due process, sentenced her to indefinite detention in ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility designed to make dangerous criminals disappear from the world. She was classified as a Level 6 terrorist, a designation that eliminated most constitutional protections and ensured that she would spend the rest of her life in solitary confinement. But something unexpected happened in the weeks following her arrest. Fragments of her research began appearing online, leaked to conspiracy theory websites and alternative media platforms in carefully edited chunks. Anonymous accounts uploaded her audio analysis comparing the ATC recordings, her financial charts tracking the put options, and scanned pages from Dr. Thorne's suppressed paper. The leaks were incomplete and disconnected, presenting tantalising glimpses of a larger truth without providing the comprehensive narrative that Mara had spent months constructing. Each fragment raised more questions than it answered, creating a puzzle that thousands of amateur researchers began trying to solve. The story spread through the conspiracy theory ecosystem with viral intensity. Mara Ellison became a martyred truth-teller, a patriotic whistleblower who had been silenced by a tyrannical government for asking inconvenient questions. Her name appeared on protest signs and bumper stickers. Her fragmented research became the foundational text of a new generation of 9/11 truth seekers who built elaborate theories around the gaps in her evidence. Online forums dedicated to her case attracted hundreds of thousands of members who spent countless hours analysing every leaked document, enhancing every audio file, and connecting dots that may or may not have been related. The movement consumed enormous amounts of time and energy from people who might otherwise have been investigating more immediate and actionable forms of government corruption. In her solitary cell, staring at concrete walls that never varied, Mara had years to think about what had really happened to her. She had access to limited reading materials, carefully selected books and magazines that were screened for security risks, but no internet, no phone calls, and no contact with the outside world except for monthly visits from a government-appointed psychiatrist who documented her mental state for official records. During those long, empty hours, she began to understand the true sophistication of the operation she had been part of. The evidence she had uncovered was real. The financial anomalies, the radar substitutions, the media manipulation had all been genuine. But her discovery of them hadn't been accidental. She had been led to each revelation by a carefully constructed trail that had made her feel like an independent investigator while actually being a participant in a psychological experiment. The goal wasn't to suppress inconvenient truths about September 11th. It was to manage them, to ensure that people who asked dangerous questions were given satisfying, but ultimately harmless answers that would occupy their attention without threatening the real power structures that had profited from the attacks. Her research had been allowed to develop just far enough to create compelling conspiracy theories, but not far enough to identify the specific individuals and institutions that were actually responsible. She had mapped the edges of the conspiracy while being carefully steered away from its centre. The 9/11 truth movement that had grown around her, leaked research was exactly what the system needed. A large, vocal, but ultimately marginalised group that absorbed dissent and channeled it into harmless activities like conference presentations, documentary films and internet discussions. The conspiracy theorists served as controlled opposition, providing an outlet for skepticism while ensuring that genuine investigation was drowned in a sea of speculation and theory. But perhaps most insidiously, her case had established a precedent for the treatment of future researchers. Anyone who began asking serious questions about government actions would be confronted with the example of Mara Ellison, the translator who had thought she was uncovering truth, but had actually been playing a role in an elaborate deception, and who had ended up spending her life in prison for crimes she didn't understand she was committing. The message was clear. The cost of curiosity was too high, the risk of investigation was too great, and the line between research and treason was too thin for ordinary citizens to navigate safely. Years passed in the unchanging routine of maximum security imprisonment. Mara aged in her cell, her dark hair going grey, her body adapting to the constraints of a space designed to contain rather than rehabilitate. She developed the 1,000-yard stare common to long-term solitary confinement, a psychological adjustment to environmental deprivation that allowed consciousness to survive even when hope had been systematically eliminated. But her mind remained sharp and she continued to think about the implications of her experience. If her investigation had been managed from the beginning, if her discoveries had been strategically placed for her to find, then how many other conspiracy theories were actually psychological operations designed to misdirect public attention? How many whistleblowers had been selected and groomed for their role? How many leaked documents were authentic information released in carefully controlled ways to create the illusion of transparency while actually deepening the confusion? How many truth seekers were unwittingly serving the interests of the very systems they believed they were opposing? The questions haunted her, but they also provided a strange form of comfort. Even in prison, even stripped of freedom and identity, she was still thinking, still analysing, still trying to understand the shape of the cage that had been built around human consciousness. In her 10th year of imprisonment, Mara received an unexpected visitor. The guard who escorted her to the visitation room was apologetic. Visits were rare, and this one hadn't been scheduled through normal channels. The visitor was a young woman, perhaps 25, with the intense focus and slightly manic energy that Mara recognised in herself from decades earlier. "Ms. Ellison," the woman said, speaking quickly as if afraid their time would be cut short. "My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been researching your case for the past 3 years, and I think I've found something important. Something about Building 7 that nobody has ever..." Mara held up her hand, stopping the young woman mid-sentence. Through the reinforced glass that separated them, she looked into Rebecca's eager, determined face and saw herself at the beginning of a journey that could only end in this same room on the other side of the same glass. "Ms. Torres," Mara said quietly, her voice rough from years of disuse, "let me ask you something. How did you first learn about my case? What was the first piece of evidence that made you think there was a story worth investigating?" Rebecca's enthusiasm was undimmed. It was a video file that was posted anonymously to a secure drop site, footage of Building 7 that I'd never seen before, with audio that hadn't been available in any of the official archives. The timing discrepancies were obvious once you knew what to look for. Mara closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Another tape, another anomaly, another researcher being led down a carefully prepared path that would feel like discovery, while actually being manipulation. "Ms. Torres," she said, opening her eyes and looking directly at the young filmmaker, "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and then I need you to walk out of here, delete whatever research you've done and never think about any of this again." But even as she spoke, Mara knew it was hopeless. Rebecca Torres had the same look in her eyes that Mara had once seen in her own mirror, the absolute certainty that she was on the verge of uncovering a truth that would change everything. The same conviction that had led Mara to spend 20 years in a cage built from her own curiosity. The cycle would continue. New researchers would be recruited, new evidence would be strategically placed, new truth seekers would be transformed into unwitting participants in their own imprisonment. The conspiracy wasn't just about what had happened on September 11th. It was about what happened to anyone who tried to look too closely at power, who asked too many questions, who believed that truth was something that could be found rather than something that was manufactured. As the guard led her back to her cell, Mara realised that she had finally understood the true scope of the operation she had been part of. It wasn't a conspiracy to hide a single crime. It was a system for managing reality itself, for ensuring that the truth would always be whatever those in power needed it to be. The smoke behind the towers wasn't just the debris of a single day's deception. It was the fog of war in a conflict that most people didn't even know was being fought. A war against the very possibility of independent thought, waged with weapons of information and cages built from curiosity itself. And in that war, every truth seeker was both a casualty and a weapon, both a victim and an unwitting soldier in an army that was fighting against its own cause. The tape that shouldn't exist had led her exactly where it was supposed to lead her, into a truth that was indistinguishable from a lie, a cage that was built from the very evidence that had seemed to promise freedom. In the end, Mara Ellison had found exactly what she was looking for, and that perhaps was the most terrifying revelation of all. The Smoke Behind the Towers, an extended investigation. What if the single most defining event of the 21st century wasn't what we were told? We've all seen the footage, heard the official story, and lived with the consequences. But what happens when a single piece of evidence lost in the system for over 2 decades falls into the hands of the one person with the skills and obsession to see the cracks in the narrative? This is not a story about easy answers. It's a story about the questions that can unravel a reality. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to Sleep Theories and hit the notification bell. We dive deep into the world's greatest mysteries, and what you're about to read will have you questioning everything. In the comments below, let us know. After learning about the inconsistencies, what's the one piece of the 9/11 puzzle that never sat right with you? Now settle in. This is The Smoke Behind the Towers. The dust in Mara Ellison's apartment was a library of dead projects. It settled on the spines of German legal dictionaries, coated the cooling fins of her overworked computer, and formed a fine grey film on the stacked plastic boxes of government transcripts that were her livelihood. The apartment itself was a testament to organised chaos. Cables snaking between translation equipment, multiple keyboards in different alphabets, and towers of reference materials that threatened to topple with each vibration from the subway below. Mara was a freelance translator, a ghost in the machine of bureaucracy, hired for her fluency in 5 languages and her singular, obsessive attention to detail. She didn't just translate words, she translated context, subtext, and the terrifying silence between official lines. Her clients range from immigration lawyers needing Farsi depositions, translated to federal agencies requiring real-time interpretation of intercepted communications. It was solitary work that suited her temperament. She'd always been more comfortable with the precision of language than the chaos of human interaction. The package from the Department of Defense's Archival Division was standard. A reinforced cardboard box, a chain of custody form clipped to the top, and inside 12 VHS tapes labelled with alphanumeric codes denoting a declassified batch of field communications from the early 2000s. The accompanying documentation was sparse. A single-page memo requesting translation of any foreign language chatter captured in the background. The pay was modest but steady, and Mara had developed a reputation for catching linguistic details that others missed. Her workspace was a shrine to analogue precision. The professional-grade VCR, a Sony model worth more than most people's cars, sat connected to a digital audio interface that allowed her to isolate frequency ranges and enhance muffled conversations. Multiple monitors displayed waveform analysis software alongside translation databases. She worked methodically, her headphones sealing her in a world of static, fragmented Farsi, Arabic phrases, and the ambient hum of old magnetic tape. The first 11 tapes were unremarkable. Routine military communications, helicopter pilots discussing weather conditions, occasional snippets of foreign languages that were either too corrupted to translate or turned out to be harmless civilian chatter picked up by sensitive equipment. She documented everything with academic precision, noting timestamps, speaker identifications, and confidence levels for her translations. Tape 7 was different from the moment she picked it up. Its label, DOD-AFC-0 91101-BROLL-4, was slightly smudged, the ink appearing fresher than the others despite the identical date stamps. The B-roll designation caught her attention, typically used for supplementary footage, background material that never made it to air. September 11th, 2001 was faded but legible in the corner, written in what looked like different handwriting than the official labels. She slotted it into the VCR with the reverence of an archaeologist handling a fragile artifact, and pressed play. The screen fizzed to life with a chaotic, familiar horror of that morning. But this wasn't the sanitized, repeatedly broadcast footage that had been burned into collective memory. This was raw, unprocessed, shot from what appeared to be a news helicopter hovering at an angle she'd never seen before. The North Tower bled a furious black plume into a perfect blue sky, but the colours were wrong. They were too vivid, too saturated, as if the horror had been amplified by the unfiltered lens. Her trained eye, honed by years of spotting inconsistencies in testimony and documentation, caught it immediately. In the lower third of the frame, a time code burned into the tape read 08:42:17 Eastern Standard Time. She knew the official timeline by heart. American Airlines. Flight 11 had struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., a 4-minute discrepancy. A chill, small and precise, traced a path down her spine. Technical errors were common in archival footage, she rationalised. Equipment malfunctions, camera operators forgetting to sync their timestamps. She'd seen it hundreds of times in legal depositions where security cameras showed impossible timelines. But as she continued watching, the discrepancy held. The timecode advanced in perfect synchronization with real time, never jumping or resetting. This wasn't a technical glitch. It was consistent, deliberate, accurate. And if it was accurate, then everything she knew about that morning was built on a foundation of sand. Then she heard the voices. They were not the panicked cries of civilians or the frantic dispatches of news anchors that had filled the airwaves. These voices were cool, professional, crackling with the distinct compression of military-grade communication systems. They were barely audible under the rotor wash and wind noise, but her equipment could isolate and enhance them. "Command, this is Skywatch. Confirmed scenario is live. Repeat, is this Vigilant Guardian live or real world?" The voice was young, male, with the clipped precision of military training but an undertone of confusion that made Mara's pulse quicken. A pause, filled with the sound of roaring fire and distant sirens. When the response came, it was from a different voice, older, calmer, carrying the authority of rank. "Maintain exercise protocol. All units. This is a live fly exercise. Treat all tracks as simulated until otherwise notified." The first voice came back, strain creeping in. "Skywatch copies. Maintaining protocol. Jesus, that's a lot of smoke for a simulation." Another voice joined the channel, different again, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. "Command, Falcon 2 requesting permission to vector intercept on the southern track. We show multiple bogies, but exercise parameters did not account for this density. Negative Falcon 2, maintain exercise posture. All tracks are part of the scenario until command confirms otherwise." Mara's breath caught in her throat. Vigilant Guardian. The name meant nothing to her, but the context was unmistakable. They were talking about an exercise, a drill, at the exact moment when the real attack was unfolding. The confusion in their voices was genuine. They couldn't tell what was real and what was simulation. She rewound the tape, listening again with professional focus. The voices were too clear to be atmospheric noise, too organised to be random civilian communications. This was operational military chatter, recorded at the highest levels of the response hierarchy. And according to the time code, it was happening before the official narrative said the first plane had even hit. The camera panned, and she saw the South Tower in the background, pristine and untouched. According to every official record, every news report, every commission finding, the South Tower would remain undamaged for another 17 minutes. But these military voices were already talking about multiple targets, exercise protocols, and maintaining simulation status. The official story was a solid wall, a monument of accepted fact constructed from thousands of testimonies, investigations and reports. But this tape was a hairline fracture in the granite. It was a glimpse of the scaffolding behind the monument, the framework that held up the official truth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. The rational part of her mind insisted this was a mislabeled tape, a bureaucratic error. Her contract was explicit about mishandled materials. They were to be reported immediately, returned to the appropriate authorities for proper classification review. But curiosity, that quiet, relentless engine that had driven her through graduate school and into a career built on uncovering meaning in chaos, overrode the fear. She didn't eject the tape. Instead, she connected it to her digital capture system and began making a perfect copy, frame by frame, preserving every pixel and every audio sample. The chill in her spine had become a frozen river, carrying with it the terrible realization that she was holding something that could unravel everything. This tape shouldn't exist, and she knew, with the terrifying certainty of someone who has spent a lifetime connecting dots that others refused to see, that she could never unsee what was on it. As the tape played on, she began taking meticulous notes, documenting call signs, voice patterns, and radio procedures. The military communications continued throughout the footage, painting a picture of an operation that was simultaneously a drill and a real-world crisis, a Schrödinger's catastrophe where reality and simulation existed in quantum superposition, until someone with the authority to collapse the wave function decided what was real. That someone, she was beginning to suspect, was not who the world thought it was. Sleep didn't come. The images played on the backs of her eyelids in an endless loop. The impossibly blue sky, the black smoke billowing against it, the time code burning like a digital scar across her vision. The voices echoed in her memory, their professional calm masking confusion that ran deeper than anyone had ever admitted publicly. By 5 a.m, she was at her desk, the glow of her monitors the only light in the pre-dawn gloom of her apartment. The city outside was beginning its daily resurrection, but Mara existed in a different timeline now, one where the morning of September 11th, 2001 was not history, but an active investigation. Her first stop was the public archive of the 9/11 Commission, a digital tomb containing thousands of pages of testimony, exhibits, and evidence. She had accessed these files before for various translation projects, but now she approached them with the focus of a detective rather than a linguist. The official transcripts were sanitized, edited for clarity and context, with extensive redactions that created black holes in the narrative where sensitive information had been surgically removed. But buried deep in a subsidiary server, linked through footnotes and cross-references that most casual researchers would never follow, she found the motherlode. Raw audio files from air traffic control centers. These were the unedited feeds from Boston Center, New York Terminal Radar Approach Control, and Cleveland Center, the front lines of confusion that morning. She put on her professional headphones, the world fading away as she prepared to immerse herself in the chaos. The audio quality was poor, compressed through multiple digital transfers over 2 decades, but her equipment could clean it up. She opened her spectrum analysis software and began the painstaking process of isolating individual voices from the cacophony. The first recordings were exactly what she expected. Controllers struggling to understand what was happening to American Airlines Flight 11. The standard protocols were breaking down in real time as they tried to re-establish contact with a plane that was no longer responding to their calls. American 11, Boston Center, are you there? The controller's voice was professional but edged with the first hints of concern. Static filled the channel. American 11, Boston Center, please respond. More urgent now, the procedural calm beginning to crack. Then a new voice entered the channel, higher pitched, laced with confusion. Boston Center, this is New York approach. We're showing a primary target, fast mover, not squawking transponder. Is this part of the Nordo drill? Nordo, no radio communications. Mara's blood turned to ice water. The Boston controller's response was immediate and sharp. What drill? I don't have anything about a drill on the roster today. What's your location on that primary? Another voice cut in. Different frequency, probably a pilot monitoring emergency channels. Center, this is Delta 243 Heavy. We're hearing some strange chatter on guard frequency. Are we exercising today? Our dispatcher didn't mention anything. Delta 243, stand by. We're trying to sort out some communication issues with one of our aircraft. But the pilot pressed. Center, serious question. We're showing traffic on our TCAS that doesn't correlate with what you're calling out. Our system is painting targets where you're not showing anything. Is this part of some kind of exercise? The timestamp on this exchange was 8:43 a.m, 3 minutes before the official time of impact. The confusion wasn't happening after the attack. It was the environment in which the attack was unfolding. The system was already compromised, already uncertain about what was real and what was simulation. Mara spent the next 16 hours obsessively comparing this raw audio to the sanitized news footage from that morning, using professional editing software to align timelines with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. She created a split-screen comparison, audio waveforms on one side, video timestamps on the other, and she found them, the edits. In the raw ATC tape, a controller could be heard screaming, "He's descending fast, passing 9,000 rate of descent. Jesus Christ, what the hell is he?" The audio cut out completely for exactly 0.2 of a second, a perfect digital slice that could only have been made in post-production. When it resumed, a different controller was speaking in measured professional tones. "We have an aircraft emergency, requesting immediate vectors for emergency descent." The panic had been surgically removed, replaced with standard phraseology that suggested control rather than chaos. She found 17 such edits in the first hour of ATC audio alone. Each one removed confusion, uncertainty, or references to exercises and drills. The real-time breakdown of the air traffic control system had been edited into a narrative of professionals responding to an unprecedented but comprehensible crisis. But the video footage revealed even more sophisticated manipulation. She had obtained raw news helicopter footage from multiple sources, some from official archives, others from amateur collectors who had recorded the live broadcasts. Frame-stepping through a raw feed uploaded by a news photographer years later, she discovered something that made her hands shake. The famous shot of the second impact, broadcast live to millions, showed the plane entering the frame and striking the South Tower in one continuous motion. But in the unedited raw footage, there was a discontinuity. 3 frames before the impact, the camera jerked violently downward, as if the operator had been startled or knocked off balance, showing the streets below for exactly 1/8 of a second before cutting back to the tower, just in time to capture the fireball. It was a blink and you miss it edit, but once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. The live broadcast had been edited in real time, with a buffer delay that allowed editors to remove the moment of human shock and replace it with a perfect, unobstructed view of the impact. The audience of one in her dusty apartment was now facing a terrifying possibility. The news wasn't just reporting the event, it was curating it in real time, managing the narrative as it unfolded, ensuring that the world saw exactly what someone wanted them to see. The difference between what happened and what was broadcast might be measured in fractions of seconds, but those fractions contained entire universes of meaning. She pulled up the official timeline, cross-referencing it with her growing database of anomalies. The pattern was clear. Every moment of confusion, every instance where the official response system revealed its underlying chaos, had been carefully edited out of the historical record. What remained was a streamlined narrative of surprise, response and tragedy, clean enough to build policy on, coherent enough to justify the reshaping of an entire civilization. But the real story was in the gaps, in the deleted seconds where the facade slipped and revealed the machinery underneath. The tape she had found wasn't just evidence of poor timekeeping or sloppy journalism, it was proof that someone had been editing history in real time, sculpting reality as it unfolded, ensuring that the official story would be the only story that survived. The question that now consumed her was simple and terrible. If they were editing the news as it happened, what else were they controlling? The digital rabbit hole led her inevitably to the physical world. Knowledge had a weight, she realised, and after 3 days of staring at screens, she needed to feel the heft of actual books, the texture of paper that had existed before the internet had made all information suspect. The New York Public Library's Science, Industry and Business Library was a temple to pre-digital knowledge, its research floors filled with bound periodicals and technical journals that predated the homogenization of online information. She took the subway through the early morning darkness, hyper-aware of every face, every reflection in the train windows, the paranoia now a constant background hum in her consciousness. She requested archived journals from the American Society of Civil Engineers, Structural Engineering International, and the Journal of Constructional Steel Research, focusing on publications from late 2001 through 2003. The librarian, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who seemed to exist in permanent twilight, led her to a research carrel buried deep in the stacks. The official reports were unequivocal. and had been sighted thousands of times. The intense jet fuel fires had softened the steel structural members, causing thermal expansion that pushed the floor joists off their supports. The floors pancaked down onto each other in a progressive collapse that accelerated due to the increasing mass and momentum. It was tragic but straightforward physics. Fire weakens steel, gravity does the rest. But in the months immediately following the attacks, before the official narrative had crystallized and academic careers had been threatened, a different conversation was happening in the margins of professional literature. She found letters to the editor, brief technical notes, and transcripts from early conferences where structural engineers voiced quiet, professional skepticism. One article, published in a now-defunct journal called Structural Integrity Review, bore the innocuous title, Anomalies in the WTC Collapse Dynamics, a Preliminary Analysis. The author was Dr. Aris Thorne, a professor of structural engineering at Northwestern University with 40 years of experience in high-rise design and failure analysis. Dr. Thorne's analysis was methodical and damning. Using basic principles of physics and publicly available measurements, he demonstrated that the towers had fallen through the path of greatest resistance, the undamaged lower floors and the intact core columns at virtually freefall speed. For that to happen, he argued, the structural resistance had to have been removed almost entirely and almost simultaneously. The observed collapse is consistent with the near instantaneous failure of critical load-bearing elements across multiple floors, he wrote. This failure mode is not consistent with thermal effects from hydrocarbon fires, which would create non-uniform heating and progressive failure. It is, however, consistent with controlled demolition techniques designed to minimize structural resistance during collapse. He included mathematical models showing that even if the fires had weakened the steel by 50%, far more than the official reports claimed, the remaining structure should have provided significant resistance to collapse. The floors should have fallen irregularly, the core columns should have remained standing, and the overall collapse time should have been significantly longer. It is akin to a car falling through the bottom of a multi-storey parking garage, he wrote, with each floor providing progressively less resistance, despite having suffered no structural damage. The physics simply do not support the official explanation. The article was peer-reviewed and published in March 2002. 3 months later, Dr. Thorne's research funding was terminated. By the end of the year, the journal itself had ceased publication, its parent organisation citing financial difficulties and changing market conditions. But Mara's investigation revealed a more complex story. Cross-referencing the journal's subscription database with the author affiliations in Dr. Thorne's article, she discovered that 7 of the 12 peer reviewers who had approved the paper were subsequently denied tenure, transferred to non-research positions, or had their federal funding mysteriously disappear. The systematic dismantling of the academic infrastructure that had supported the questioning of the official narrative was surgical in its precision. Dr. Thorne himself became a new obsession. His university profile, archived on the Internet Wayback Machine, showed a distinguished career spanning 4 decades, with over 200 published papers and millions of dollars in research grants. But in early 2002, his page was updated to show that he had taken an indefinite sabbatical for personal reasons. She dug deeper, following a trail through archived academic mailing lists, conference proceedings, and professional networking sites. The last traces of Dr. Thorne's professional existence were found in a niche engineering message board devoted to structural failure analysis. The forum had been active from 1997 to 2003, when it was apparently taken offline permanently. But Mara had learned to look in the forgotten corners of the internet, the places where data went to die but never quite disappeared. Using advanced search techniques and cached page reconstructions, she found fragments of the discussion threads. Dr. Thorne's final posts were increasingly frantic in tone. He described pressure from university administrators, threats to his family's safety, and mysterious visitors who claimed to be federal investigators but carried no proper identification. His last post, dated September 15, 2002, exactly 1 year and 4 days after the attacks, was brief and chilling. The data is the data. Mathematical models don't lie. Steel doesn't care about politics, and gravity is not a government agency. They can threaten my funding, my reputation, even my family. But they can't change the laws of physics. I've said all I can. To those still listening, they're watching. I suggest you all be careful what you look for. You might not like what finds you back." He never posted again. A follow-up news search revealed a brief article from the Chicago Tribune, buried on page 7 of the Metro section 6 months later. "University professor missing. Foul play not suspected." The article was perfunctory, almost dismissive. Dr. Thorne had been reported missing by his sister when he failed to appear for Christmas dinner. His car was found at O'Hare Airport, keys in the ignition, a plane ticket to Vancouver in his name unused at the gate. Professor Thorne had been under considerable stress related to academic disputes, an unnamed university spokesperson was quoted as saying. "This appears to be a case of someone needing to start fresh somewhere else." But there was no trail after that. No credit card usage, no bank withdrawals, no rental agreements or employment records under his name, or any obvious aliases. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who had spent 40 years building a paper trail of academic achievement, had simply evaporated. Mara closed her eyes in the sterile library lighting, the weight of the revelation settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The systematic silencing hadn't been limited to Dr. Thorne. As she continued her research, she found a pattern of structural engineers, metallurgists, and physics professors who had raised questions about the official collapse narrative in those crucial first months after the attacks. All of them had faced professional consequences. All of them had been marginalised, defunded or discredited, and all of them had eventually stopped asking questions about September 11th. The few who continued their research had moved to other countries, found positions in private industry, or simply disappeared from the academic record entirely. What remained was a consensus not of discovery but of survival, a scientific community that had learned, through selective pressure and systematic intimidation, that certain questions would not be tolerated. The official story wasn't just the accepted version of events, it was the only version that was professionally survivable. As she gathered her notes and prepared to leave the library, Mara felt exposed under the flickering fluorescent lights. The paranoia was no longer abstract. It was a physical sensation, a cold certainty that she was being observed, catalogued, evaluated for the threat she might represent. The knowledge she was accumulating had a price, she realised, and others had already paid it. The question now was whether she would be added to the list of people who had learned too much for their own good. The feeling of being watched had evolved from paranoia into operational security. Mara began varying her routines, taking different routes home, using cash for purchases, and conducting her most sensitive research from internet cafes and public libraries, rather than her home computer. She had read enough about surveillance to know that once you were on someone's radar, digital footprints became roadmaps to your location and intentions. She also began using layered VPNs, routing her internet traffic through servers in countries with strong privacy laws, and communicating through encrypted channels that existed in the shadow spaces of the internet. Her investigation moved from mainstream archives to the digital underworld where disgruntled employees, amateur researchers, and information brokers traded in data that governments preferred to keep buried. It was in one such forum, a dark website dedicated to air disaster investigations and aviation anomalies, that she encountered the handle at Radar Ghost. His initial posts in the 9/11 section were bitter rants about cover-ups and government lies, the kind of conspiracy theorising that most serious researchers ignored. But buried in his rambling messages were technical details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of air traffic control systems. After weeks of careful cultivation, building trust through shared technical knowledge and encrypted private messages, at Radar Ghost agreed to share something that had haunted him for over 20 years. "This will cost me everything if it's traced back to me," he wrote, in a message encrypted with military-grade protocols. "I was working approach control at a facility that doesn't exist in any official record. We had primary radar coverage of the entire East Coast corridor. I saw things that morning that were scrubbed from every official database, but I kept copies. Insurance, you understand. Don't disappoint me." The file arrived 3 days later, a massive data dump disguised as a corrupted email attachment. When Mara finally decrypted and decompressed it, she found herself staring at 24 hours of raw primary radar returns from September 11th, 2001, not the sanitized transponder data that appeared in official reports, but the unfiltered radar reflections from every object in the sky over the eastern United States. The data was overwhelming. Commercial airliners, private jets, military aircraft, weather balloons, and the electronic noise that cluttered the airspace of the world's busiest aviation corridor. It took her days to write filtering algorithms, cleaning the data, and tracking specific radar signatures through the chaos. She focused first on American Airlines Flight 77, the Boeing 757 that had allegedly struck the Pentagon. The official story was straightforward. The flight had departed Dulles International Airport on schedule, proceeded normally for 36 minutes, then turned off its transponder over southern Ohio, made a wide U-turn back toward Washington, and descended into the Pentagon at high speed. But the raw radar data told a more complex story. The transponder signal for Flight 77 did indeed vanish over Ohio at 8:56 a.m., exactly as the official report stated. But the primary radar target, the physical reflection from the aircraft itself, continued westward for another 63 nautical miles before it simply disappeared from the screen. It didn't fade gradually or descend below radar coverage. It vanished instantly, as if the aircraft had been switched off like a light bulb. Simultaneously, a new primary target appeared on the scope near the West Virginia border, moving southeast at 540 knots toward Washington, D.C. This new radar signature had the exact characteristics of a Boeing 757. The same cross-sectional area, the same speed capabilities, the same flight profile. But according to the official timeline, the real Flight 77 was already well to the east and no longer under radar coverage. The timing was surgical in its precision. The original target disappeared at exactly 9:09:32 a.m. The new target appeared at 9:09:34 a.m., 2 seconds later and 60 miles to the south. It was as if the aircraft had been teleported, or as if one plane had been replaced by another in a carefully choreographed handoff. Radar Ghost's encrypted messages provided context. See it now? The swap. We called it aircraft substitution in our training manuals, something the military practices during war games when they need to simulate different aircraft types or flight profiles. They paint a new bird on the screen using electronic countermeasures, make the old one disappear using radar jammers. We saw what they wanted us to see. Mara cross-referenced the radar data with archived flight tracking information from that morning. The pattern became even more disturbing when she examined United Airlines Flight 175, which had struck the South Tower. Like Flight 77, its transponder signal disappeared over New Jersey, but the primary radar returns showed the aircraft continuing north for another 40 miles, before vanishing and being replaced by a different target that descended into Manhattan. The implications were staggering. The radar evidence suggested that the aircraft everyone watched strike the World Trade Center and Pentagon were not the original commercial flights. They were substitutes, introduced into the airspace during the confusion of the morning's military exercises. But substitutes for what? If the original flights hadn't crashed into the buildings, what had happened to them? And what exactly had struck the towers? Her correspondence with Radar Ghost became increasingly cryptic as he realized the magnitude of what he had revealed. His final message was short and urgent. They know I've been talking. Moving the family tonight. The data you have is real, but is only part of the picture. Look for the fighter jets that weren't supposed to be there. Look for the electronic warfare signatures. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone who claims to be trying to help you. The people who did this have been cleaning up loose ends for 20 years. The account at Radar Ghost went dark after that message. When Mara tried to reach him through back-channel communications, she found that all his digital identities had been systematically erased. Email accounts closed, forum profiles deleted, encrypted messaging services showing no record of his user credentials. It was as if he had never existed. But the radar data remained, a digital fossil of a truth that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. The morning of September 11th hadn't just been a terrorist attack, it had been the largest military deception operation in modern history, a shell game played with passenger aircraft while the world watched in horror. The question that now consumed Mara's every waking moment was simple and terrifying. If the planes that struck the buildings weren't the original flights, and if the original flights had been made to disappear somewhere over the American heartland, then who was responsible for the greatest aviation magic trick ever performed? And more importantly, what had happened to the 244 people who had been aboard those vanished aircraft? The scope of the deception was threatening to overwhelm her analytical capabilities. Aircraft substitution, media manipulation, academic intimidation. The threads were weaving together into a pattern so vast and complex that her rational mind struggled to process it. She needed something concrete, something that operated according to simpler rules than military operations or information warfare. She needed to follow the money. Financial markets were brutal in their honesty. Numbers didn't lie, couldn't be intimidated into silence, and left paper trails that were nearly impossible to completely erase. If someone had advanced knowledge of the attacks, they would have found ways to profit from that knowledge, and those profits would be traceable. Mara spent her remaining savings on access to premium financial databases and trading analysis software. She focused on the 3 trading days immediately preceding September 11th, 2001, looking for anomalies that screamed insider knowledge. The first anomaly was so blatant it seemed impossible that it hadn't been front-page news for months. Put options, essentially bets that a stock's price would fall, had spiked to unprecedented levels for American Airlines and United Airlines stock. The volume was not just unusual, it was statistically impossible without advanced knowledge. American Airlines put options had increased by 1,300%, above normal volume on September the 6th and 7th. United Airlines puts had spiked by 1,100% over the same period. Someone had wagered hundreds of millions of dollars that these 2 specific airlines, and only these 2 airlines, were about to experience catastrophic losses. But the betting wasn't limited to the airlines. Insurance companies had been targeted with similar precision. Marsh & McLennan, the insurance brokerage that occupied floors 93 to 100 of the North Tower, had been hit with massive put option purchases. So had Swiss Re and Munich Re, 2 reinsurance giants that would face billions in claims from the attacks. Even more specifically, put options had been purchased against Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and other financial firms that had major offices in the World Trade Center complex. The pattern was surgical. Only companies that would be directly impacted by the destruction of the towers were targeted for bearish betting. The profits from these trades, had they been collected, would have totaled over $2.5 billion. It was the most successful short-selling operation in financial history, predicated on advanced knowledge of one of the most devastating attacks in human history. Mara traced the trading orders through a labyrinth of financial intermediaries. The initial purchases had been placed through a network of small brokerages in Germany, Switzerland and Japan, locations chosen for their bank secrecy laws and regulatory opacity. But using advanced financial forensic software, she was able to peel back the layers of financial obfuscation. The ultimate source of funding led to a Russian bank called Seveny Trust, which intelligence analysts had identified as a clearinghouse for money laundering operations tied to former Soviet intelligence services. But even that wasn't the end of the trail. The most chilling discovery came when she traced what had happened to the profits. The put options had not been exercised. In the days following September 11th, when these trades would have generated enormous profits, they had been quietly abandoned. The traders had walked away from $2.5 billion rather than claim winnings that would have created an obvious money trail leading back to the conspiracy. But Mara's analysis revealed that equivalent amounts of money had simultaneously appeared in accounts tied to defence contractors and private military companies. Blackwater, Halliburton, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, corporations that would become the primary beneficiaries of the post-9/11 military-industrial complex, had received massive, mysterious capital injections in the weeks following the attacks. The money hadn't been collected as trading profits, which would have triggered regulatory investigations. Instead, it had been recycled through a complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts, ultimately funding the very companies that would profit most from the subsequent War on Terror. She cross-referenced this financial data with stock performance in the months following the attacks. Defence contractor stocks had exploded in value. Blackwater had grown from a small military training company to $1 billion private army. Halliburton had received no-bid contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The weapons manufacturers had seen their stock prices triple, as America embarked on 2 decades of perpetual warfare. The pattern was inescapable. The same financial networks that had bet against the airlines and insurance companies had positioned themselves to profit enormously from the military response to the attacks. It was a perfect financial strategy. Short the targets, invest in the solution, then create the crisis that makes both positions profitable. But the most damning evidence came from an analysis of the timing. The put options hadn't just been purchased in the days before the attacks. They had been strategically timed to expire on September 21st, 2001, exactly 10 days after the attacks. This wasn't random speculation or lucky guessing. It was a precisely calibrated financial operation designed to maximise profits from advanced knowledge of a specific date. Mara sat back in her chair, the weight of the discovery crushing down on her. She had always imagined that if 9/11 was an inside job, it would be motivated by grand geopolitical strategy, ideological fanaticism, or the pursuit of imperial power. The reality was both more mundane and more horrifying. It was about money. The attacks weren't just a catalyst for reshaping global politics. They were the centerpiece of the most profitable investment strategy in human history. The towers had fallen, 3,000 people had died, and 2 decades of war had followed, all to execute a financial plan that had generated trillions of dollars for a small group of investors who had known exactly what was going to happen and when. She began mapping the ownership structures of the shell companies that had received the laundered profits. The network was vast and sophisticated, but patterns emerged. Many of the ultimate beneficiaries were names she recognized from business headlines. Defense industry executives, private equity firms specializing in military contractors, and investment funds that had emerged from nowhere in the early 2000s to become major players in the military-industrial complex. But one name kept appearing in her analysis, buried deep in the ownership structures and corporate boards: Meridian Group, a private investment firm that seemed to exist at the nexus of defense contracting, intelligence services, and international finance. Every financial thread she followed eventually led back to companies with Meridian connections. Meridian Group had been founded in 1999 by former intelligence officials and Wall Street executives. Its public portfolio focused on emerging security technologies and crisis management solutions. But Mara's research revealed that it also held controlling interests in companies across the entire 9/11 profit chain: the defense contractors who built the weapons, the private military companies who fought the wars, the surveillance technology firms who monitored the homeland, and the financial institutions that funded the entire operation. It was a vertically integrated conspiracy, a corporate structure designed to profit from every aspect of the post-9/11 world. And if her analysis was correct, the same people who had financed the attacks had then positioned themselves to profit from the response, creating a closed loop of violence and profit that had sustained itself for over 2 decades. The scope of the financial conspiracy was staggering, but it also provided something that the other evidence had lacked: concrete proof of premeditation. Markets might be manipulated, radar might be spoofed, and media might be controlled, but money trails were nearly impossible to completely obscure. The put options were smoking gun evidence that someone had known exactly what was going to happen on September 11th and had invested billions of dollars to profit from that knowledge. As she compiled her financial research into a comprehensive report, Mara realized she was no longer just investigating a terrorist attack. She was mapping the architecture of a shadow economy built on manufactured crisis, where the same people who created the problems also owned the companies that sold the solutions. The question was no longer whether 9/11 had been an inside job. The financial evidence made that undeniable. The question was how many other crises, how many other wars, how many other national emergencies had been manufactured by the same network of investors who had learned that terror was the most profitable business on Earth. What if I told you that buried beneath the frozen wastelands of Alaska lies something that could change everything we know about human history? Something that's not ancient at all, but very much alive. Tonight's story comes from a request by Matul Patel 9283. Thank you for this incredible suggestion. If you have ideas for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoy these tales that blur the line between fact and fiction, don't forget to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more mysterious stories that will keep you wondering. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I found beneath 200 feet of Alaskan permafrost, and why the government wants me to forget it ever existed. I'm a civil engineer, nothing glamorous about it. I measure soil density, calculate load-bearing capacities, and make sure buildings don't sink into the ground. For 15 years, I've worked contracts across the country, from Florida swamplands to Nevada deserts. Alaska was supposed to be just another job. The US Army Corps of Engineers hired me in March 2023 to survey land stability for a proposed pipeline route. Nothing unusual there. Energy companies are always looking to move oil from point A to point B, and they need someone to tell them their pipes won't crack when the ground shifts. The pay was good, the timeline was reasonable, and I needed the work. The assignment took me to a stretch of wilderness about 60 miles northwest of Fairbanks. On paper, it looked simple, a 3-month survey of geological stability across a 40-mile corridor. I'd use ground-penetrating radar, seismographs and core samples to map what lay beneath the surface. Standard procedure. I should have known something was off when they gave me a satellite phone with specific instructions to check in every 12 hours. Weather can change fast up there, the project coordinator explained. We need to know you're alive. But Alaska's a dangerous place. People disappear into the wilderness all the time. It seemed reasonable. I flew into Fairbanks on a Tuesday in April, rented a heavy-duty pickup truck and loaded it with equipment. The drive to my assigned sector took 3 hours on increasingly rough roads. The last 20 miles were barely more than frozen tyre tracks cutting through endless stands of black spruce and birch. When I finally reached my starting coordinates, the silence was absolute. No wind, no animals, no aircraft overhead. Just me, my equipment, and thousands of square miles of nothing. That's when the work began, and that's when everything I thought I knew about the world started to unravel. The first week went exactly as planned. I established a base camp with a generator-powered trailer and methodically began surveying the proposed pipeline route. The ground-penetrating radar showed typical permafrost patterns, layers of ice and soil that had been frozen for millennia. My seismograph readings were clean, showing the kind of stable bedrock that pipeline engineers love to see. Core samples revealed nothing unusual. Standard Arctic soil composition with good load-bearing characteristics. I was making excellent progress. Then, on day 8, something changed. I was setting up the radar array for the morning survey when I noticed interference patterns on my display. Instead of the usual chaotic scattering that indicates rock and soil, I was seeing geometric shapes. At first I assumed it was equipment malfunction. Electronic devices can act strangely in extreme cold, and I'd been pushing my gear hard. I recalibrated the radar, replaced cables, and ran diagnostic tests. Everything checked out perfectly, but the shapes remained straight lines, perfect 90-degree angles, and beneath everything a massive triangular form with sides that extended beyond my radar's maximum penetration depth of 200 feet. I switched to the seismograph, thinking maybe sound waves would give me different data. I set off small explosive charges and measured how the shock waves travelled through the ground. Standard geological surveying technique. The results made no sense. Sound waves were reflecting off something solid and geometrically perfect about 150 feet down. The reflection pattern showed clean edges, flat surfaces, and precise angles. In nature, you don't find precise angles. Rivers meander, mountains erode into curves, and rock formations crack in random patterns. This was something else entirely. I spent the rest of that day running every test I could think of. Different frequencies, multiple angles, overlapping surveys. every single measurement confirmed the same impossible truth. There was a massive pyramid buried beneath the permafrost, and it was huge. My calculations suggested sides at least 800 feet long, significantly larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The depth readings indicated it was sitting on bedrock, which meant it had been built on the surface and then buried by millions of years of geological processes. Except that made no sense either. Alaska's geological history doesn't include ancient civilizations capable of megalithic construction. The entire region was under glacial ice, until relatively recently in geological terms. I sat in my trailer that night staring at the printouts and digital displays, trying to find any explanation that didn't challenge everything I understood about engineering and archaeology. Maybe it was a natural formation that just happened to look geometric. Maybe my instruments were picking up interference from buried metal or deposits. Maybe the extreme cold was affecting my equipment in ways I didn't understand. But deep down I knew I was looking at something artificial, something that had been deliberately constructed and then hidden beneath the ice. The question was, who built it, and why? I needed supplies, and more importantly, I needed to talk to someone who knew the area's history. The nearest settlement was a village called Yukon Crossing. Population 127 according to the road sign. It was a 40-minute drive south on a road that tested every shock absorber in my truck. Yukon Crossing looked like a lot of rural Alaskan towns. A handful of weathered buildings clustered around a general store and a combination post office does gas station. Most of the residents lived in trailer homes or log cabins scattered among the trees. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin grey columns against the bright spring sky. The general store served as the unofficial community centre. Inside, I found an elderly native Alaskan man named Joseph Kaltag behind the counter, selling everything from canned goods to ammunition to fishing gear. He looked like he'd been running the place for decades. "You're the pipeline engineer," he said before I could introduce myself. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast," I replied. "Not much happens around here." He rang up my purchases: batteries, fuel canisters, and enough food to last another week. "You working up in the Forbidden Valley?" I looked up from counting cash. Forbidden Valley? Joseph's weathered face remained expressionless, but I caught something in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or warning. That's what my grandfather called it. Said the spirits there were angry, animals won't go near it, and hunters who get too close. He shrugged. "Their compasses don't work right." "Magnetic interference," I said automatically. "Probably iron ore deposits in the bedrock." Maybe he handed me my change, or maybe some things are better left buried. I was loading supplies into my truck when a younger native woman approached. She introduced herself as Marie Kaltag, Joseph's granddaughter, and a pilot who flew supply runs to remote camps throughout the region. "I heard you talking to Grandpa," she said, "about the valley where you're working." He mentioned compass problems. Marie glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "It's more than that. I've flown over that area maybe 50 times in the last 10 years. My instruments go crazy. GPS cuts out, radio gets static, engine RPMs fluctuate." "Electromagnetic interference," I suggested. That's what I thought too. But 3 years ago I was flying a supply run to a hunting camp about 20 miles north of your work site. Clear day, perfect visibility. I was following the river when my GPS started spinning. Compass needle was rotating like a clock hand. She paused, clearly uncomfortable with the memory. I looked down to try to navigate by landmarks, and I saw something that shouldn't have been there. Lines in the snow, geometric patterns like someone had carved designs into the landscape. They were huge, maybe a mile across and perfectly symmetrical. Could have been natural formations, wind patterns, erosion channels. Marie shook her head. "I've been flying over Alaska my whole life. I know what natural looks like. This was artificial. And when I flew back over the same area a week later, the lines were gone, covered by fresh snow." I thanked her for the information and headed back to camp, but I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Geometric patterns in the snow, electromagnetic interference, compasses spinning wildly. It all pointed to the same conclusion I was trying to avoid. Something beneath the permafrost was actively affecting the environment around it. That night, I reviewed my survey data again. looking for any detail I might have missed. The pyramid structure was consistent across all my measurements, but there was something else. Subtle variations in the electromagnetic readings that suggested complex internal architecture. Whatever was down there, it wasn't just a solid mass of stone. It had chambers, passages, and what looked like intricate internal mechanisms. And according to my instruments, some of those mechanisms were drawing electrical current. I woke up on day 12 to the sound of helicopter rotors. From my trailer window I could see a Black Hawk settling onto a flat area about 200 yards from my camp. No military markings, but the aircraft had the unmistakable look of government hardware. 3 men in winter camouflage climbed out as the rotors spun down. They walked directly to my trailer with the confident stride of people who expected cooperation. The leader was a tall man with close-cropped hair and reflective sunglasses. His companions looked like soldiers trying to dress like civilians, too alert, too fit, and carrying themselves like they had weapons hidden under their jackets. "Mr. Harrison," the leader said, reading my name from a tablet. "I'm Agent Collins, Department of Homeland Security. We need to discuss your recent survey findings." I stepped outside, keeping my expression neutral. I wasn't aware DHS had jurisdiction over pipeline surveys. "We have jurisdiction over potential national security threats." Collins gestured toward my equipment array. "Your seismic activity has been flagged by our monitoring systems. We need to examine your data and confiscate any materials related to subsurface anomalies." "What subsurface anomalies?" Collins removed his sunglasses, revealing pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Mr. Harrison, we know exactly what you found down there. The question is whether you're going to cooperate voluntarily or make this difficult. I had 2 choices: hand over my data willingly or watch them take it by force. Either way, they were getting what they wanted. "The hard drives are in the trailer," I said. One of Collins' men immediately headed inside while the other began disconnecting my external monitoring equipment. They worked with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with this type of confiscation. "How long have you known it was there?" I asked. Collins was quiet for a long moment, apparently deciding how much to tell me. "The structure first appeared on our deep scanning systems in 1992. We've been monitoring it ever since." "Appeared? You mean you discovered it in 1992? "No, Mr. Harrison. I mean it appeared in 1992. Prior to that date, our scans showed normal bedrock composition. Then something changed." The man emerging from my trailer handed Collins a bag containing my hard drives and backup storage devices. They had also taken my printed survey maps and handwritten notes. 1992, I said, thinking out loud. That's when China conducted their largest underground nuclear test. Collins' expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, that I'd made that connection. "The Lopner test was 3,800 miles away," he said. "There's no possible connection." But his tone suggested otherwise. And I remembered something from my geological studies. Seismic waves from large underground explosions can travel through the Earth's crust and trigger responses in sensitive areas thousands of miles away. What if the Chinese nuclear test had somehow activated whatever was buried beneath the Alaskan permafrost? "You're being reassigned," Collins continued, handing me an official-looking document. "Your contract has been terminated due to unforeseeable circumstances. A helicopter will arrive tomorrow morning to transport you back to Fairbanks." "What about my equipment?" "It's been contaminated by proximity to hazardous materials. Standard decontamination procedures require disposal." That was obviously a lie. There were no hazardous materials in the area. I'd have detected them during my survey. They were confiscating everything because they didn't want me to have any physical evidence of what I'd found. "One more thing," Collins said as his team prepared to leave. "You'll be required to sign a non-disclosure agreement before returning to civilian areas. The penalty for violating that agreement is 10 years in federal prison." They climbed back into their helicopter and lifted off, leaving me alone with my suddenly empty trailer and a growing certainty that I'd stumbled into something much bigger than a pipeline survey. But I still had one advantage. They thought they'd taken all my data. They were wrong. I've always been paranoid about data backup. Too many years of watching hard drives crash and taking blame for lost survey information. So I keep a small handheld GPS unit with built-in memory storage that automatically logs all my location coordinates and instrument readings. Collins and his team had missed it because it was clipped to my belt, looked like standard hiking gear and wasn't connected to my main computer systems. That night, I reviewed the stored data on the device's tiny screen. Everything was there. Coordinates, depth readings, electromagnetic measurements, and seismic mapping data. Enough information to prove that something massive and artificial was buried beneath the permafrost. But proof wasn't enough. I needed to understand what it was and why the government was so determined to keep it secret. I made a decision that probably should have gotten me killed. I was going back to the site for one final investigation. The helicopter pickup was scheduled for 8 a.m, which gave me about 6 hours of darkness to work with. I loaded basic equipment into my backpack: a handheld GPS, the digital camera, a small electromagnetic field detector, and a battery-powered radio, and hiked back to the survey area. The night was clear and bitterly cold. My breath formed ice crystals that seemed to hang in the air, and the snow crunched under my boots with sounds like breaking glass. Above me, the aurora borealis painted green curtains across the star-filled sky. I reached the coordinates where my instruments had detected the pyramid's apex. According to my calculations, I was standing directly above the structure's highest point, about 120 feet below my boots. The handheld detector immediately started showing readings. Electromagnetic activity was significantly higher than background levels, and it seemed to be increasing. The device's small screen showed wave patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat, regular pulses of energy rising and falling in consistent cycles. I took photos of the instrument readings and recorded GPS coordinates, building a digital record that I could hopefully smuggle out of Alaska. But as I worked, something strange began happening. The aurora overhead was changing. Instead of the usual flowing curtains of light, it was forming geometric patterns, straight lines and angular shapes that mirrored the underground structure. It was as if the buried pyramid was somehow influencing the electromagnetic phenomena in the upper atmosphere. That's when I felt the vibration. It started as a barely perceptible tremor in the ground, like the feeling of a distant freight train. But it quickly intensified until I could feel it in my bones, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to synchronize with the electromagnetic readings on my detector. The device's screen was flashing warnings. Energy levels were spiking far beyond anything I'd measured during my official survey. Whatever was buried down there was waking up. I started backing away from the site, but before I could get more than 50 yards, everything electronic I carried died simultaneously. The GPS unit, the detector, my digital camera, even my LED flashlight, all dead, as if something had delivered a massive electromagnetic pulse. Above me, the aurora was blazing brighter than I had ever seen, forming complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air itself seemed to be humming with energy, and I could feel static electricity building up on my clothing and exposed skin. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The aurora faded back to normal patterns. The ground vibration ceased. The electrical sensation disappeared. I was left standing in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness in complete darkness, holding a handful of dead electronics. I stumbled back toward camp using starlight for navigation, reaching my trailer just before dawn. When I tried to start my truck, the engine turned over immediately. Apparently whatever had killed my handheld electronics hadn't affected the vehicle's more robust electrical system. But I knew what I had experienced wasn't natural. The buried pyramid wasn't just an ancient artifact or geological formation. It was some kind of active installation that could influence electromagnetic fields across a wide area. The question was, what was its purpose? The helicopter arrived exactly at 8 a.m, piloted by a civilian contractor who seemed unaware that he was participating in a government cover-up. During the flight back to Fairbanks, I signed the non-disclosure agreement Collins had mentioned, legally binding myself to remain silent about my discoveries. But signing the paper didn't erase my memory, and it didn't eliminate the data I'd managed to keep hidden. I flew back to Seattle that afternoon and spent the next 2 weeks trying to return to normal life. I updated my resume, contacted potential clients, and attempted to focus on finding my next engineering contract. But I couldn't stop thinking about what lay buried beneath the Alaskan permafrost. Late one night, unable to sleep, I sat down with my laptop and started researching everything I could find about electromagnetic anomalies, underground structures, and the 1992 Chinese nuclear test that Agent Collins had mentioned. What I discovered changed everything. The Chinese test, conducted at the Lop Nür facility on May 21st, 1992, was indeed one of the largest underground nuclear explosions ever detonated. The blast was so powerful that seismic monitoring stations around the world recorded the shockwaves as they travelled through the Earth's crust. But that wasn't the interesting part. I found archived scientific papers describing unusual electromagnetic phenomena that occurred globally in the days following the test. Radio disruptions, satellite communication failures, and compass anomalies were reported from locations thousands of miles away from the blast site. Most significantly, several research stations in Alaska reported sudden spikes in local electromagnetic activity, beginning approximately 6 hours after the Chinese detonation. Exactly the amount of time it would take seismic waves to travel through the Earth's crust from Lop Nür to Alaska. I cross-referenced these reports with geological surveys of the Alaskan region and found something that made my blood run cold. Every single electromagnetic anomaly had been reported from locations within a 50-mile radius of my survey site. Whatever was buried there had indeed been activated by the Chinese nuclear test, just as Collins had implied, but the implications went far beyond a simple cause and effect relationship. I started plotting the locations of other reported anomalies on a world map, looking for patterns. What I found was a global network of similar sites, places where electromagnetic activity had spiked following major seismic events, underground installations that seemed to respond to specific triggers. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that the Alaskan pyramid wasn't unique. It was part of a worldwide system of buried structures, all apparently designed to respond to geological disturbances, but designed by whom, and for what purpose? I thought back to the night I'd witnessed the energy pulse, remembering how the aurora borealis had formed geometric patterns directly above the burial site. Aurora phenomena are caused by charged particles from the sun interacting with Earth's magnetic field. If the underground structure could influence those interactions, it was essentially broadcasting energy into space. What if the buried pyramids weren't ancient monuments at all? What if they were communication devices, a global network designed to transmit signals to somewhere far beyond Earth? The possibility was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. If I was right, then humanity shared the planet with technology that predated our entire civilization by potentially millions of years. Technology that was still active, still responding to triggers, still sending messages to unknown recipients. I spent weeks researching similar sites around the world, building a database of locations where unusual electromagnetic phenomena had been reported following major seismic events. The pattern that emerged was undeniable, a global network of transmission stations, all apparently activated by disturbances in the Earth's crust. But before I could take my research any further, I received a letter that ended my investigation permanently. The letter arrived exactly 1 month after my return from Alaska. It was delivered by certified mail to my apartment address, though I hadn't given that information to anyone connected with the pipeline project. The return address showed only Department of Interior Special Projects Division, with a Washington, D.C. postal box number. Inside was a single page of official letterhead containing a brief message. Mr. Harrison, this communication serves as final notice regarding your terminated contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, project classification, Black Ice. Subsequent to your departure from the survey area, additional geological analysis has determined that the subsurface structure you detected is not archaeological in nature. The structure is an active installation of unknown origin that poses potential risks to national security. Any attempt to publicise information related to this discovery will result in immediate prosecution under the Espionage Act of 1917. Your signed non-disclosure agreement remains in full effect indefinitely. The installation you discovered is not a relic. It is a machine. Do not pursue further inquiry. Sincerely, Director, Special Projects Division. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. They weren't denying what I'd found. They were confirming it. The underground structure was artificial. It was active, and the government had known about it for over 30 years without understanding what it was or who had built it. But the most chilling aspect was the letter's final warning. It is a machine, not a monument, not an archaeological site, not a natural formation, a machine. I thought about the energy pulse I'd witnessed, the geometric patterns in the aurora, the electromagnetic signals that seemed to respond to seismic events around the world. If the buried pyramid was indeed a machine, then its purpose was clear. It was designed to detect and respond to geological disturbances by transmitting signals into space. The question remained, signals to whom? I locked the letter in a safety deposit box along with copies of all my survey data and research findings. If something happened to me, at least there would be evidence that the discovery had been made. But I never published my findings. I never contacted journalists or researchers or anyone else who might be interested in the truth about what lay beneath the Alaskan permafrost, because I realised that some knowledge carries a price too high to pay. If there really was a global network of alien communication devices buried beneath our feet, broadcasting our planet's geological status to unknown recipients in space, then humanity was living on borrowed time. We were tenants on a world that belonged to someone else, someone who had installed monitoring equipment long before our species existed. The machines weren't dormant relics of an ancient civilization. They were active components of a surveillance system that was still operational after millions of years. And every earthquake, every volcanic eruption, every nuclear test was sending updates to whoever had built them. I returned to my normal life as a civil engineer, taking contracts that kept me far from Alaska and far from any situation that might uncover similar installations. I told myself that ignorance was safer than knowledge, that some secrets were better left buried. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that machine humming beneath the permafrost. I wonder if it's still transmitting. I wonder who's listening, and I wonder what they plan to do when they decide we've learned too much about the world we think we own. For 6 months, I managed to convince myself that forgetting was possible. I took contracts in familiar territories, building inspections in suburban developments, soil analysis for shopping mall construction, routine work that involved nothing more mysterious than concrete and rebar. Then the dream started. At first they were just fragments, flashes of geometric light, the sound of deep humming that seemed to vibrate through my bones, the sensation of standing on solid ground while everything around me pulsed with invisible energy. I'd wake up with my heart racing and a metallic taste in my mouth as if I'd been breathing electrified air. But the dreams became more vivid as weeks passed. I began seeing the pyramid not from above, as I had during my survey, but from within. Vast chambers carved from black stone that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Corridors that stretched beyond the reach of any illumination, filled with the constant sound of machinery that had been running for millennia. In these dreams, I wasn't alone. Shadowy figures moved through the passages, tall, elongated forms that seemed more like geometric projections than living beings. They moved with purpose, tending to controls and displays that covered the walls in intricate patterns of light and symbol. The most disturbing part was that they seemed aware of me. In the dreams, they would pause their activities and turn toward me with attention that felt like cold judgment. Without faces I could recognize, without voices I could understand, they somehow communicated a single clear message. I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. I consulted a sleep specialist, thinking the dreams were delayed stress responses from my time in Alaska. She prescribed medication that helped me fall asleep but didn't stop the visions. If anything, the drugs made them more intense, more real, more impossible to dismiss as products of an overwrought imagination. It was during one of these medicated dreams that I saw something new, a global map covered in points of light, each one marking a location where similar pyramids lay buried. The network stretched across every continent, even beneath the ocean floors, hundreds of installation sites, all connected by lines of energy that pulsed in synchronized patterns. I woke from that dream with absolute certainty that I was seeing something real. The buried machines weren't isolated installations. They were nodes in a planetary communication grid that spanned the entire world. 3 days later, I made a decision that changed everything. I started investigating again. Using the global locations from my dreams as starting points, I began researching electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained phenomena at similar sites around the world. What I found was a pattern so consistent it couldn't be coincidental. Every location where I'd dreamed of seeing a pyramid corresponded to a place where unusual events had been reported. The Nazca lines in Peru, built over an area where aircraft instruments malfunctioned regularly. The underwater structures near Bimini in the Bahamas, where submarines had reported mechanical failures and compass deviations. The Giza Plateau in Egypt, where modern surveys had detected massive voids beneath the known pyramids. Each site shared common characteristics: electromagnetic interference, geometric precision in ancient or unexplained structures, and a history of covering up or dismissing scientific findings that couldn't be easily explained. But the most significant pattern was temporal. Every site had experienced increased activity following major seismic events, exactly like the Alaskan installation after the 1992 Chinese nuclear test. I compiled a database of seismic events and electromagnetic anomalies dating back 50 years. The correlation was undeniable. Large earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and underground nuclear tests consistently triggered responses from specific locations around the globe. The buried machines weren't just monitoring geological activity, they were responding to it, broadcasting information about Earth's internal dynamics to receivers beyond our planet. I was building a case for the existence of a global alien surveillance network when I made a discovery that terrified me more than anything I'd found so far. The activity was increasing. According to my research, electromagnetic anomalies at these sites had been relatively stable for decades, showing only minor fluctuations in response to major geological events. But starting in 2020, the baseline activity levels had begun rising at all locations simultaneously. Something was changing. The network was becoming more active, more responsive, more awake. I plotted the activity increases on a timeline and noticed they correlated with something unexpected. The global increase in seismic activity over the past few years. More earthquakes, more volcanic eruptions, more geological instability than had been recorded in previous decades. What if the relationship wasn't cause and effect? What if the buried machines weren't just monitoring geological activity? What if they were causing it? The possibility was so disturbing I initially dismissed it as paranoid speculation. But the more I studied the data, the more compelling the evidence became. The timing was too precise, the correlations too consistent. If I was right, then humanity was living on a planet where alien technology was actively destabilizing the geological systems that supported all life on Earth. But why? What possible purpose could be served by triggering earthquakes and volcanic eruptions? The answer came to me during another dream, but this time I was prepared. I had set up a digital recorder beside my bed, hoping to capture any words or sounds I might make while experiencing the visions. What I heard when I played back the recording the next morning was my own voice, but speaking words I didn't remember saying. Stress testing, planetary stability assessment, structural analysis phase approaching completion. I'd somehow been speaking in the technical language of engineering, describing the geological chaos as if it were a planned evaluation of the planet's physical integrity. The machines weren't trying to destroy Earth, they were testing it. Over the following weeks, I dove deeper into geological data, looking for patterns that might support my terrifying hypothesis. What I found convinced me that the buried network was conducting a systematic analysis of Earth's structural stability. Seismic events weren't random, they were following a pattern. Stress points in tectonic plates were being tested in sequence, as if something was methodically evaluating how much pressure the planet's crust could withstand before catastrophic failure. The 2011 Japanese earthquake and tsunami, the 2010 Haiti earthquake, the increasing volcanic activity in Indonesia, Italy and Iceland, the unprecedented earthquake swarms in places like Oklahoma and Arkansas. All of these events clustered around locations where I'd identified buried installations. I created detailed models showing how the network might be triggering these events through focused electromagnetic pulses directed at specific geological fault lines. The technology required would be far beyond human capabilities, but for a civilization that could build planet-spanning monitoring networks, it would be routine engineering. But the most chilling aspect of my research was the timeline. If the current rate of geological testing continued, the network would have evaluated every major tectonic system on Earth within the next 5 to 10 years. What would happen when the testing phase was complete? I spent sleepless nights imagining scenarios, planetary mining operations that required clearing the surface of inconvenient biological life, terraforming projects that would remake Earth's atmosphere and geology, or simple property reclamation by the network's builders returning to a world they had left unattended for millennia. None of the possibilities included a future for human civilization. It was during this period of growing despair that I received an unexpected contact that changed everything once again. The email appeared in my inbox on a Tuesday morning with a subject line that made my blood freeze. Alaskan survey data, classification black ice. The sender's address was scrambled text that looked like a random string of characters, clearly routed through multiple encryption services to hide its origin. But the message content was brief and specific. Mr. Harrison, we know what you've discovered about the global network. Your research parallels investigations conducted by others who have encountered similar installations. A meeting has been arranged. Be at the Starbucks on Pine Street in downtown Seattle tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. Bring your data. You're not the only one who has seen the machines. The message included no signature, but attached to it was a single photograph that made my hands shake. An image of my own survey equipment at the Alaskan site, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been watching my investigation from a significant distance. Someone had been monitoring me during my time in Alaska, someone who wasn't part of Agent Collins' government team. I spent the entire night debating whether to attend the meeting. It could be a trap, government agents trying to identify how much I knew and what evidence I still possessed. Or it could be exactly what it claimed, contact with others who had discovered the truth about the buried network. In the end, curiosity won over caution. I needed to know if I was really alone in this knowledge, or if there were others working to understand the threat humanity was facing. The Starbucks was crowded with the usual mix of students, business people and remote workers when I arrived at exactly 3 p.m. I ordered coffee and found a table near the back, trying to identify anyone who might be waiting for me. At 3:15, a woman in her 50s approached my table. She had greying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wore field clothing that suggested outdoor work, and carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to physical challenges. "Mr. Harrison," she extended her hand. "I'm Catherine Webb. I think we need to talk." She sat down across from me and immediately began speaking in low, urgent tones. "I'm a marine archaeologist. 3 years ago, I was leading a deep-sea survey off the coast of Bermuda, when my team discovered an underwater structure that shouldn't exist. Geometric, massive, and actively generating electromagnetic fields that interfered with our equipment. She opened a tablet and showed me sonar images that looked remarkably similar to my ground-penetrating radar data from Alaska. A pyramid-shaped structure, perfectly symmetrical, sitting on the ocean floor at a depth of nearly a mile. When we tried to publish our findings, the research was classified and our funding was terminated. Sound familiar? I nodded, unable to speak. Catherine continued, but I kept investigating privately. I found evidence of at least 12 similar installations in deep ocean locations around the world. All of them show the same characteristics: geometric precision, electromagnetic activity, and apparent activation following seismic events. She showed me more images: underwater structures near Japan, the Mediterranean, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Each one was clearly artificial, clearly ancient, and clearly active. "There are others," she said. "A geologist in Australia who found similar structures in the outback. An archaeologist in Egypt who discovered chambers beneath the Sphinx that contain technology that shouldn't exist. A seismologist in Chile who documented electromagnetic pulses preceding earthquake activity. How many others? We've identified 17 researchers worldwide who have encountered installations or phenomena that appear to be part of the same network. Most have been silenced through official pressure, funding cuts, or career destruction. A few have simply disappeared. Catherine leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But some of us have continued working in secret. We've been sharing data, building a comprehensive picture of what we're dealing with. And what are we dealing with? A global surveillance and control system that's been operating for thousands of years, possibly millions. The installations aren't just monitoring Earth, they're managing it, controlling geological processes, atmospheric composition, even biological evolution through environmental manipulation. The implications hit me like a physical blow. We're not alone on this planet. We never have been. The question is whether humanity developed naturally, or whether we're the result of controlled biological development guided by whoever built the network. Catherine showed me more data, archaeological evidence of genetic bottlenecks in human evolution that corresponded to periods of unusual geological activity, atmospheric changes that seemed to follow patterns rather than random climate variation, even extinction events that appeared to have been artificially triggered. The network has been shaping Earth's development for millions of years, she said. Every mass extinction, every ice age, every major evolutionary leap has been guided by the installations. But why? What's the purpose? Catherine's expression was grim. We think Earth is being prepared for something. The stress testing you've documented, the increasing seismic activity, the atmospheric changes, it all points to final preparations for some kind of major transition. Transition to what? We don't know. But based on the escalating activity levels, we estimate it will begin within the next few years. She handed me a secure phone with an encrypted communication app. If you want to help us understand what we're facing, this will put you in contact with the others. We're working to decode transmissions from the installations to map the complete network, and to find some way to predict what's coming. What if we can't stop it? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then at least humanity will know the truth before the end. Over the following months, I became part of an underground network of researchers from around the world. Using encrypted communications and careful operational security, we shared data, theories, and discoveries about the installations that had consumed our professional lives. What emerged from our collective research was a picture of Earth that challenged everything humanity believed about our planet and our place in the universe. The installation network was vast. Over 300 confirmed sites across all continents and ocean floors. Each site contained structures of identical design but varying scale, all built from materials that didn't match any known geological formations. The construction showed evidence of technology far beyond human capabilities, with precision that exceeded our best modern engineering. But the most significant discovery came from Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a linguist and cryptographer in Japan who'd been analysing electromagnetic transmissions intercepted from the installations. The transmissions weren't random energy pulses, they were coded communications in a mathematical language that described Earth's physical and biological status in incredible detail. Real-time reports on atmospheric composition, geological stability, ocean chemistry, magnetic field fluctuations and biological diversity levels. More disturbing were the projections embedded in the transmissions, mathematical models showing how Earth systems would respond to various environmental stresses, including massive geological disruptions, atmospheric changes and population adjustments. The network was continuously updating these models based on data from the stress testing we documented. Each earthquake, each volcanic eruption, each environmental change provided new information that refined the projections, and all of the models pointed to the same conclusion: a massive intervention scheduled to begin when current biological systems reached predetermined stress thresholds. We were approaching those thresholds rapidly. Climate change, resource depletion, ecological collapse, and social instability were all being monitored by the network. But rather than random consequences of human activity, they appeared to be planned phases in a managed transition process. Humanity hadn't created the environmental crisis. We were living through the final stages of a controlled experiment that had been running for thousands of years. The realization was overwhelming. Every environmental disaster, every resource shortage, every social conflict was part of a planned sequence designed to bring Earth's biological systems to a specific end state. But what would replace them? The answer came from an unexpected source: my dreams. As I became more deeply involved with the research network, my nighttime visions became more detailed and informative. I was seeing not just the installations, but the purpose they served. The geometric beings I encountered in the dreams weren't aliens. They were artificial intelligences, created by the network's builders to manage Earth's transition through automated systems. The real builders were gone, had been gone for millions of years, but they had left behind a planetary management system designed to prepare Earth for their eventual return. The stress testing, the environmental manipulation, the biological management, it was all preparation for recolonization by a species that had left Earth eons ago and was now ready to reclaim it. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that machine humming beneath the permafrost. I wonder if it's still transmitting. I wonder who's listening. And I wonder what they plan to do when they decide we've learned too much about the world we think we own. Because now I know the truth. We are temporary occupants of a world that has always belonged to someone else. The installations beneath our feet are counting down to a transition that will remake Earth according to specifications we cannot understand for purposes we cannot imagine. The truth is out there, buried beneath the ice in places like Alaska, waiting for the next contractor or surveyor or accidental discoverer to stumble across it. When that happens, and it will happen eventually, I hope they're wiser than I was. I hope they don't go back for one final look in the darkness, because some machines are better left undisturbed, and some signals are better left unsent. But the signals are being sent anyway, carrying reports of a planet ready for reclamation by its original inhabitants. The countdown has begun, and we are running out of time to understand what we're facing, or to find a way to survive what's coming.